Great.
Get us live. Okay.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Cap. Oh, let's give it just another second here as people join and enter. We're going to get started here in just a moment. I want to go ahead and first of all, welcome to everybody who's listening and participating both via Zoom and on Facebook, and all those folks who are going to be listening in the future. We get a lot of a pickup of these later on from the recordings. My name is Joe Cap, and I am the co-chair of National Entrepreneurship Week. And man alive, what a week it has been. We started off on Valentine's Day showing entrepreneurial love with entrepreneurship education, K-12 community college, and college four-year institutions, and what great learnings there were. On Tuesday, it was Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Day, where we highlighted the ecosystem of entrepreneurial support organizations, nonprofit institutions, organizations supported by a couple of the agencies on here, and the great work that they do providing skills, resources, workshops, a whole host of things. On Wednesday, we did a host of federal government agencies and just shared an array of resources, and we're going to share more of that today with a whole bunch of agencies from USDA, from NASA, and really ran the gamut. Yesterday, we highlighted and spotlighted a range of entrepreneurs, and it was really fantastic. The entrepreneurs from folks who run construction companies, to beauty companies, to Native American, to actors, to social entrepreneur, Mother Teresa's previous secretary, who is a social entrepreneur and running a whole bunch of entrepreneurial events and stuff. And today is Funding Friday. How fantastic. Money, 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 right? It's probably the most frequent question that I get as somebody who teaches entrepreneur, and it was probably one of the biggest challenges that our panelists here today encounter. But before we go ahead and introduce our panelists, we're going to show a very quick video about National Entrepreneurship Week. Amber, please.
Welcome to National Entrepreneurship Week. My name is Joe Cap.
And I'm Amber Ravenscroft.
5 years ago, we relaunched National Entrepreneurship Week, a congressionally chartered annual event to support and uplift America's new business startups. Originally founded in 2006, National Entrepreneurship Week takes place every year during the third week of February.
All across the United States, from Maui to Miami to Maine and everywhere in between, America's entrepreneurial ecosystem is vibrant and thriving. National Entrepreneurship Week celebrates the unmatched, innovative American spirit that has brought to life amazing products and services, and includes a beautiful tapestry of diverse entrepreneurs.
During the week, you'll hear from a host of United States federal agencies as they share information on entrepreneurship and small business programs. You'll also hear from a nationwide network of partners, including entrepreneurial educators, ecosystem builders, and most importantly, entrepreneurs from all walks of life as they participate in the excitement of National Entrepreneurship Week.
Join in celebrating National Entrepreneurship Week by organizing an event in your local community, listening in on one of our national webinars, or participating in our annual social media campaign.
There has never been a better time to start a new business, and we challenge you to unleash your ideas into action during National Entrepreneurship Week.
National Entrepreneurship Week is made possible by contributions from an array of generous partners.
Views and opinions expressed in National Entrepreneurship Week programs are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of National Entrepreneurship Week, its agents, or any U.S. government agency. Any agency's participation or support is not an endorsement of any product, service, or entity. All liability with respect to any recommendations are hereby expressly disclaimed.
Well, great. Thank you, Amber, so much for showing that and sharing that video. So today, we're kicking off Funding Friday with a couple of panelists who are really going to share some fantastic insights about ways to access capital and some of the programs that the agencies offer for entrepreneurs. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask each of you to introduce yourself, introduce your agency, and also tell us personally, like you have the ability to work in an array of different things and areas, but tell us why like small business and entrepreneurship is something that's really interesting for you and why you've made this as part of your career. So Martha, why don't we start off with you?
Awesome. Well, Joe and Amber and Tina and the entire team behind this week's events, I just want to start out with a big thank you because I know for myself and for Bailey and Adair, this is an area of passion, and you convening so many different people to talk about entrepreneurship and make sure resources are accessible is critical. So I had to start out with a big thank you for what you're doing. I am Martha Miller. I am director of an office within the US Securities and Exchange Commission that is focused on access to capital and how we can support that for businesses that are scaling from the earliest startups all the way to companies that are preparing to go public, and then post IPO to the smaller public companies that are working within our markets. It's a very dynamic area. To me, it's the most fun area for companies that are building and growing. It's the area of passion and dreams and ideas that together you take an entrepreneur and investors and you build something wonderful. So I'm thrilled to be here today and have an opportunity to talk about it. And it's also a really wonderful opportunity to get to talk about a part of the SEC, not to be confused with the Southeastern Conference, the other SEC, the DC-based SEC, that is more commonly associated with our public markets. But we have so much to offer because the ways that you go about raising everything from your seed to your Series A to angel capital and crowdfunding, all of that falls within the rules that we work on trying to help support capital raising. So thrilled to be here today. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, and those rules are so important for entrepreneurs and for people to understand, to help them navigate the opportunities, but also the challenges. So thank you for joining us today. Next up is Bailey. Bailey, thank you for joining us today from the SBA, and thank you for our conversations earlier this week. Please share with us a little bit more about the SBA and also your passion for small business and entrepreneurs.
Great. Wonderful to be here with you today. And Joe, thank you for all that you are doing to illuminate the work that we do at the federal government to support entrepreneurship. We're very grateful. So I have the privilege of serving as the Associate Administrator of the Office of Investment and Innovation at the Small Business Administration. And with that, our office is responsible for overseeing a program called the Small Business Investment Company Program. You might say, what is that? Okay, well, it is the program where the SBA partners with private funds, private equity, and private credit to help increase funding to small businesses across all corners of the country, and particularly those that are challenged getting financing from traditional sources. So the program is responsible for the deployment of over $34 billion of capital today. In addition to that, on the innovation side, our office oversees and manages the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Tech Transfer programs. So this is often referred to as America's Seed Fund, where we provide non-dilutive funding to support research and development, prototyping and commercialization of deep tech ideas. So really the earliest of early in innovation to help create those great ideas that will fuel growth and innovation well into the future. To support that, we also manage a number of ecosystem support organization relationships and provide funding to those. It is capital, but it's also networks. It's really important. My passion for entrepreneurship and small businesses, I always attribute it to my father. So he was a small business owner who dropped out of college and started his first small business, and it has been a way of life, and I have a deep passion for helping entrepreneurs and small business owners.
Well, that's great. I can't wait to dive into the conversation a little bit more. In fact, speaking of innovation, we had a fantastic panel with the SBA earlier this week with the Aspen Institute and the XR, VR, virtual reality, mixed reality association talking about innovation and entrepreneurship and the next generation of that. It was just a fantastic panel. So we're so excited to have the SBA back to talk about these variety of programs. And one other point of note is yesterday we had an entrepreneur who is working and actually participating with an incubator navigator program that I think you guys set up, and it was great to hear. He's starting a business, but he's also helping to serve as an advocate. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. Adair, welcome from the Department of from the US Treasury. Please share some more information about the work that you do, the agency, and also your passion for small business and entrepreneurship.
Thanks, Joe. As the other said, it's delightful to be here, and it's good we have the federal government gender balance going here. I'm Deputy Assistant Secretary for Capital Access at Treasury. I'm also the lead on what's called the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which has all kinds of things wrong with those words. The SSBCI, we've referred to it. We provide 10 billion of funds to state, territory, and tribal governments, who in turn stand up programs for lending and for entrepreneurship and equity investment. And we just had our closing of the state and territory applications with these programs from the states and territories where $3 billion of programs from most of the states and territories are equity. So these are incubator programs, they're seed programs, they're venture development, public-private partnership programs, as well as venture funds, seed funds, participations with the states and territories. So exciting times to see this kind of capital being brought to bear to democratize the geography as well as the demographics of the ecosystem of raising entrepreneurial finance. So the other parts of the question, I'm a Berkeley finance professor, is who in my real world, I'm on leave from Berkeley. So I've been teaching new venture finance and impact investing for years and years. And my passion for this, I was an entrepreneur when I was 21 and started a business and realized, entrepreneurship is, whether it's being an entrepreneur or being entrepreneurial in corporate or entrepreneurial in government, it's where the creativity and the innovation, it's what is like very inspiring to people. And I just love being in that spirit of trying to push forward with new ideas and new innovation, and can't emphasize enough how important it is for, as we move into issues of, the wealth gaps by race or making sure that, I mentioned gender, women are able to get financing, or certainly there's climate opportunities evolving, and all of these things across the board, that things that we can bring to bear and support with the federal government. We're all here working together to try to support the folks on this call doing what you're doing. Thanks,
yeah,
Joe.
well, thank you. And this idea of, democratizing entrepreneurship and access to capital is absolutely one of the reasons that Amber and I restarted National Entrepreneurship Week a couple of years ago. When I was appointed to the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Department of Commerce, I learned so much about different agencies and the opportunities that exist for individuals. One of the things that I learned that was absolutely crucial, and I think it's lost sometimes with a lot of folks, is that as agencies, oftentimes when you are trying to make decisions about funding, you guys have to push out a lot of money in order to make these programs happen. And it's not an easy task. And this is something that I learned. It's really, really not. You want to go ahead, you have a responsibility to make sure that the funds that are being used in a very judicious way. And that has a lot of responsibility. And as a part of that, there are programs that are set up with a number of different institutions all across the United States. So in terms of programs, there are a couple of programs like the SBIR program that we mentioned earlier, and I'm going to try to avoid using acronyms that work and provide funds directly to entrepreneurs. But then there's also a lot of resources and funding that go to organizations, kind of like what you mentioned, Adair, accelerators and incubators. And that's where a lot of the funding for entrepreneurs who are interested in building businesses and starting businesses can access some of those programs and some of those funds. And I just wanted to make that distinction because I didn't realize that as an entrepreneur. Yeah, there's prizes and there's grants and you can contracts, and that's some of the ways. But I think it's really important for folks to understand that if you're thinking about starting a business, some of the first places to go are some of the local organizations, the small business development centers that are part of the SBA, some of the other CDFIs that are funded as well. And so I just wanted to put that out there because I think it's an important distinction because oftentimes one of the biggest questions that I get was how do I get money from the federal government? And I think that what happens is that people sometimes face a challenge with that regard. So I just wanted to set that as a framework for those folks who are listening, because doing a little bit of research, hey, if you're an entrepreneur, you have an obligation to figure out what your local ecosystem is and where you might be able to get funding for your business. So sorry, I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, and I'm gonna go ahead and just move over to some of the questions. So talk to us a little bit about some of the programs. And Bailey, maybe we'll start with you. From a big picture perspective, what programs do you feel like something that entrepreneurs really should consider for accessing capital for their small business and for their entrepreneurial ventures? And then we'll go ahead and ask each of you that same question.
Well, I'll speak first about our programs, specifically about capital access, and then a little bit about some of the networks we support, because those are ways to also get access to capital. But the SBIC program, so the Small Business Investment Company program that I touched on earlier, that our program office is responsible for, we actually will maintain a list of all of the licensed SBIC fund managers on our website, and I can provide that in the chat in a minute. To give a sense of all of the funds that are in the market, where they are located, that are committed to investing in small businesses across the country. By being licensed as an SBIC, they know that we will share their information and they will take the leads and take the calls. And so we certainly encourage small businesses to reach out to these fund managers to connect with them. And that is a great way to potentially access non-traditional capital outside of banks. Outside of my office, a peer of mine is responsible for our Office of Capital Access, and that office is responsible for the SBA lending programs. We have a working capital lending program called the 7A program, and we have a lending program for assets and asset-intensive lending. So think of it as property, plant, and equipment, and that is the 504 loan program. And I will provide specific information about eligibility requirements for that in the chat as well. Now, those lending programs, they work in that we establish relationships with intermediary banks, and information on those intermediaries is also on our website, and you can look up the zip code or city that you are located in, and it will provide you with the list of organizations that can help you there. So I will focus on those two key areas when we talk about our capital programs. But besides that, as you mentioned, Joe, we are in every local community to the extent that we can be, and we're working to build out our networks either directly or indirectly to support ecosystems that help entrepreneurs navigate their way to access capital or have information about funding programs at the federal level. So in addition to the small business development centers, we have a program called Community Navigators. These are organizations that specifically exist to help entrepreneurs understand all the potential ways that they could get access to capital, as well as assistance with starting their businesses or supporting the growth of their businesses. So really exciting program that was launched just this year. And in addition to that network, we have a host of innovation-focused accelerators and incubators across the country that I'll provide information on. And we provide grant and prize funding to those organizations every single year. And they are committed to helping entrepreneurs raise capital and develop strong business plans and also connect to other federal resources.
Well, thank you for that. And I actually want to go ahead and just say this one thing, because being an entrepreneur, having started businesses, having worked with a number of entrepreneurs and teaching entrepreneurship, the one thing that I want to say to all the entrepreneurs that are listening out there is, because I know that one of the biggest things that people say is the access to capital is actually the biggest issue that they find. But in many cases, what I find actually is that many of the small businesses and the entrepreneurs aren't necessarily actually ready to even accept that capital. And so there's some work that we as entrepreneurs have to do before we're even ready to accept that capital, because we need to be able to spend it to grow our business. And so we have to get our own personal house in order to be able, if you're going to go to a bank, if you're going to try to get outside investors. So one of the things that I would encourage folks to do is to work with some of these programs to get their proverbial financial house in order, so they're actually able to use these funds in the most effective way to grow their business and to get to a point where they're actually be able to really, really substantially benefit from their business. Martha, I want to ask you the same question about programs for folks to consider as part of the Small Business Capital Formation Office that you really essentially have built out. So please share with us.
Yes, happy to. So unlike my other two federal colleagues on the call, where we actually have money that we are dispersing, we are in some ways the least exciting office, but also I think the most exciting office. We give out $0 in our office.
Let's compete.
However,
Let's compete.
Let's compete. So we give out $0. So I think that I'm winning with the lowest price tag of what you can get from us. But the flip side of that is, what we are doing instead is enabling entrepreneurs to go out and raise capital from the trillions of dollars that are invested into different business enterprises each year. And that's really critical because we have vast capital markets. So SEC is one of the few federal agencies that doesn't have a grant program that you apply to. We are instead working with the capital markets to make sure that they are fair, orderly, and efficient, that we're protecting investors, and that we are facilitating that capital raising activity that's so critical. So one of the things that I'd love to just highlight for those that are on the call and thinking, okay, where do I get started? Because that's a question that we hear often of, okay, I know I need money for my company, but what's the starting point? And the starting point that I always like to remind people of is that it might sound really exciting. And Adair probably has heard this 1,000 times from students in her lectures. Somebody might come in with an idea for a business and their starting point is, and I'm ready to raise venture capital to get started. And maybe, but there's a lot of other sources that you need to look at, including non-dilutive capital, meaning money that can come into your business that doesn't change how much of it you own. Because once you bring in investors, they're actually going to hold a piece of the company and have a right and a say in how it's run in many instances. And so one of the things that we want to help people understand is, okay, so there are broad pools of different types of money, whether it is bank loans, fintech, grant programs, incubator and accelerator type of funding that you might be able to find. And one of the most important things is we want to make sure that people are taking stock of all of the different types of funding options before they zone in on a specific one, because until you know what's on the menu, walking into a restaurant and ordering before you have even figured out what the restaurant has on the menu is a little bit silly, because you're going to miss out on the specials and you're going to miss out on the thing that might be the best thing for you. Only about 6 to 7% of small businesses raise capital from investors. 6 to 7%, that's a really small fraction of the businesses. The rest are going out, and when they're seeking external capital, they're looking at using personal savings. They're looking at direct loans and, financing programs where they have an obligation to pay it back, but the source of that capital is not owning the business. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is to help make sure that when someone comes into our office or is looking for resources on how to raise capital from investors, that we make sure that they go over and look at some of the SBA's resources on, okay, have you exhausted all of these? Have you looked over at some of the things that the IRS has put out there for tax purposes as you think about the consequences of what you might be bringing in? And only when you're ready to bring in capital from investors should you start embarking on that journey. And then once you are ready, because we want to make sure that when you are ready, you have the tools that you need then at that point in the journey. We have a lot of resources that we have been developing as a team to equip entrepreneurs with what you need to be savvy about the options you have and to understand how to navigate the difference in crowdfunding and angel investors and venture capital. Those are all really, they're different types of capital with different expectations and different requirements and obligations that you have to go through. So Joe, for me, we have $0. So again, don't send us a grant application. There isn't one online. If you find one, it's not the SEC. But do explore all of the different options that exist before you zone in on one thing. Settling for something before you figured out your options, I think, is one of the more short-sighted things you could do for your business. And figuring out the lowest cost of capital to start with is a critically important first step for your business.
I want to touch on this non-dilutive conversation, because as an entrepreneur and as a finance guy, some of the language sometimes can be a little bit unapproachable. And I want to make sure, you have said this, but I just want to underscore that when you're starting a business, a lot of people are looking for money, and I know that we have a bunch of questions and we'll get to those, but it's really important for you to have your own personal situation in order in terms of really looking at, because running a business is going to require you to go out there and roll up your sleeves and do a lot of work. And you have to be able to have a proverbial runway of your own your personal financial house in order to be able to sustain yourself. And I think that that's important. And Martha, one of the things that I know that you guys have done is put together a tool to help people kind of navigate what kind of funding. And I hope that you'll talk about that a little bit later.
Okay, I'll talk about it later, but I just dropped a link into the chat to our capital raising hub so that those who are listening can go and poke around and start looking at the navigator tool. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but for those who are getting antsy and wanting to find that resource now, I've dropped that in and have some ideas for the questions that are coming in on how do you get your house in order. We'll answer those in the order that our wonderful host poses them, but great questions that are being asked on topics that are really critical.
I saw Amber pop in.
I was going to pop in and say, Joe, if you said get your house in order one more time without explaining what that means, these people are going to riot. So,
yeah, I mean,
you saw that question.
Sure. So let me just go ahead and just address that. And Adair, potentially you as a professor can also go ahead, because what that means, for me as a financial advisor, people would come and they would have a lot of outstanding debt, personal debt on credit cards. And so when they wanted to take the risk of starting a business, they didn't have a lot of personal money saved up or the ability to be able to invest their own funds first to develop their idea. So having your own house in order really means taking a look at your own financial situation, how much you own, how much you owe. We had a great conversation yesterday with an entrepreneur in Arkansas, and she said that in order to start her business, and it was a makeup line, she cut back on everything. She cut back on going out, she cut back on this, she cut back on that in order to go ahead and put herself in a situation where she could run her business. And as a result of that, she's been able to be successful in her business and grow it. And now her own situation, her own personal situation is such that she's able to do a lot of different things and expand her business. Adair, I'd like you to touch on that piece for just a second about getting your house in order, because as a professor and working with a lot of students, I'm sure you've had those conversations, and then talk to us a little bit about some of the stuff that goes on at the Treasury Department.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. And I must say, if I was, in the boat of starting a business, I surely am going to Martha first, and I may end up at Bailey taking money from the SBA. But it seems really a wise point, right? The getting the thinking through things. I know entrepreneurs, you know, the dilutive comment. Let me hit that directly. You start a business, you own 100% of it. When you take equity capital, VC, investment capital, this kind of money, seed capital, all this language, angel capital, it's usually that you're giving up that 100%, right? And bringing on a co-owner for getting the investment you need to grow that business. The choice is, you know, the other story that Martha was mentioning is you take on debt, and then you have to pay off that debt as you're going forward. And when you take on debt, you get to keep your ownership. It's super important. You also have to make those debt payments. And those debt payments are the ones that, for an entrepreneur just starting, can be the ones that put you, you know, the minute you start to not be able to make those debt payments is the minute that you know you need to start thinking about a different path. And so that, you know, there's pros and cons here, and a lot of it is, as Martha said, not just about it's about figuring out where you are, right? If you have revenue streams and you have money that can support the debt, for sure you want to keep your 100% ownership of your startup if that's who you are. If you're just starting with an idea and revenues are a few years down the road, you're not going to have much choice. That's what the equity, the seed market, the angel markets, you know, the incubator accelerators, that's what that's for. And so it's understanding that landscape of where you are in not just your preferences, but also your ability to make those loan payments is really a key factor when you're you know, talking to your students, Joe, or to mine, or, you know, right, that's a key thing you have to think through. And it's pretty important to understand that landscape. On the debt side, one debt is not all the same as all other debt, right? So I'm sure Martha's tool, and Martha in general, has a lot to say about this. And this is what makes the SBA so wonderful in so many ways, is that the role of different products in getting interest affordable debt, but also you have to take into account things like signing your personal liability on debt. And there's a lot of new innovative products out there. You know, historically, we know from research that 83% of small businesses, this is dated a bit, but I'm sure it's still true, are using some personal form of credit card liability to support their small business, right? That's a big number, right? Now that we're talking about small business at large and not entrepreneurship starting today, but still, that people are taking on personal liability, right? That you're signing your name, it's your credit history, it's your house sometimes, right? It's your liability on that entrepreneurship. And of course, entrepreneurs take that that signature very, very seriously. And so this is something to consider, and one has to read the fine print, sadly, right? In things that when you're going down this path. And also there's new innovative products out there in the market that are tied to payment providers and tied to other mechanisms that support entrepreneurs, support Main Street, right? We all, you know, have seen those payment, you know, machines that often have credit products attached to them. And, you know, these can be super empowering because they're tied to how much revenue you're getting in. Sometimes the products are, but again, you need to just read the fine print and understand what's right and sustainable for your business moving forward. And, you know, make wise decisions after you make sure everyone is giving the information you need. And so you need to demand that information. And that's what the federal, one of the things, as Martha said, we're not just here at the federal government to provide money, but we hope to provide the ecosystem of knowledge and technical help with navigating. And I think the SBA and the SEC both use that navigating term, right? Navigating is a key word. So, Joe, I didn't talk about Treasury at all.
Yeah, just give me 1 second, because I just want to touch on this for 1 second, because our next panel is actually going to be on bootstrapping your business. So there's also mom and dad and friends and family, and Patreon is actually going to be coming on board in order to help people really think about building an income stream. And you touched upon a piece here when I talk about putting your house in order. If you're going to get a loan from a bank, they're going to want to know what your financial capabilities are. I'm going to ask all the entrepreneurs that are listening here, take for a second and turn yourself around for a second and think of yourself as investing in somebody's business. And they're going to come and ask you, hey, I want to borrow money from you. What's the question that you're going to ask? You're going to ask the question, you know, somebody comes to you and says, I gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. You're going to want to know, when am I going to actually get that money back? And the banks are going to want to know. Somebody who's going to lend you money, they're going to want to know, are you able to pay? A lot of businesses start out from a bootstrapping perspective, and that's one of the things that you're talking about, where they're working with friends and family, mom and dad, cousins and aunts. And we're going to talk about that on the next panel. And I think it's important to understand that that is actually a component. And then we could talk about lending, and we talk in the afternoon session, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the dilutive and also some of those emerging pieces. The other piece that I want to, Adair, just want to touch on is, you mentioned this about sort of this new type of financing where you're able to go ahead and work with a company like Square, these other companies where you're actually bringing in income, but they're also providing a loan to help you build your business, and they may be taking money as you're bringing in income. Those are new and emerging ways that companies can finance, you know, building a business. And I just wanted to point that out there because I want to take it to a point that people may be able to really appreciate as a part of the way that they're building their business. But please share with us some of the programs from a Treasury perspective that are taking place right now.
Okay, so Treasury, you know, we generally our programs are state and territory facing, right? We are the government bank, if you will, and so a lot of what we do is supporting things that are either facing states and territories or facing the financial infrastructure, the CDFIs, for example, the CDFI fund. And so Treasury provides a lot of financing that is not direct to entrepreneurs, that is sort of behind the scenes. So maybe if Martha did a great job of saying we have zero,
you have lots of zeros.
We have a lot of money.
You have lots of zeros. You have many
we
zeros.
I
have
have
one.
They're just not. They're not for the entrepreneur to apply directly. But let me just say something about programs in general. Having worked with CDFIs and having worked with the states in building up the incubators and these other mechanisms, if I could just talk about the importance of using your community resources, using the networks that you have on the ground. So as we've worked with the states on the SSBCI program in supporting their developing these seed funds and incubators and other things, right? The story about raising startup capital, this is growth capital where you need a lot of money to get going, and you have a high growth trajectory, not so much the lifestyle business, but really focusing on lifestyle business. It's really, the ecosystem is not equitable across the United States. And it's just hard sometimes for entrepreneurs in places where there's not that community ecosystem to find that capital interested in that idea. And so what we've been doing at Treasury is really supporting state efforts and territory efforts and tribal efforts to build more incubators and build more support in helping entrepreneurs to pitch into the system, right? This is the whole getting early stage capital is this pitch process. And what does a pitch mean? A pitch means how big is that market going to be that you're going after? And, you know, what kind of funding are you getting? And, you know, how do you see yourself growing? Even though you don't have any proof of revenues, right? It's really understanding how to I'm going to say play in that game. And we hope that the Treasury programs help develop that ecosystem, working with the states and territories and tribes. We believe deeply in that community aspect and really supporting efforts, because the states want that ecosystem, and the universities in every state want that ecosystem. The folks sitting in a corporation that have an idea want that ecosystem. And so we've spent a lot of time doing that, as well as, of course, our historic role with the CDFI fund. We've just transferred, in addition to the CDFI regular money, that we've just allocated $9 billion for CDFI growth and support coming out of the pandemic. And really, the CDFI ecosystem and being able to have relationships with small businesses is why we have still this localized, quasi-banking, quasi-lending, right? The localized system really matters for entrepreneurship, where it may not matter so much these days in technology for other financial products. So, Joe,
Yeah.
back to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. It was really interesting. Martha and I were having a conversation not too long ago, and I'm going to go ahead and steal a little bit of your thunder, but you guys have done a study which found that the second biggest issue for most entrepreneurs are networks, right? And networking. And so, one of the things that I say is your network is your net worth. We had an entrepreneur here the other day who said, the bigger your network, the sooner you can stop work. And so I'm going to actually go ahead, all those entrepreneurs that are listening out there, Adair touched on this ecosystem piece, and I want to go ahead and just clarify what that means, because that may not necessarily be entirely apparent. And then Martha, I'm going to throw it back over to you to kind of weigh in on this a little bit more, because you guys did this study, but you're everywhere in the United States, there are folks who are able to help you, whether you're in a rural community, a USDA rural development, the SBDCs, your local nonprofits, development organizations, your local chambers of commerce, community colleges, libraries. There are institutions that are out there already. All of those combined make up the ecosystem that you can approach in order to expand your network. And your job as an entrepreneur is to go out and be intentional about increasing that network. Martha, I'd like you to expand on that piece, because I know it's not necessarily a fund piece, but to kind of Adair's point, it actually does have an impact, because the more people you meet, the more you talk about your product, your service, the more you refine that, and the more opportunities there are to come into contact with people who can potentially provide you both resources and funding. Martha, do you want to add to that?
Yes. Can I tell a little funny story as I do it? And so this is a story of something that happened internally, where we were trying to get a press release out. This was a few months ago, trying to get a press release out of the SEC, and it had the word ecosystems in it. And it was talking about small business ecosystems, and we were really excited. We've been working on it, and our press office came back and they said, "That's a biology word. That's not going to resonate. We can't put that out in a press release from the SEC. That's biology." And I said, no. We are really talking about ecosystems. And they said, no, we're not putting biology in there. But I think it's actually the best analogy, because if you remember as a kid studying ecosystems, and I remember a science experiment that we did where we had a little terrarium in the classroom, and we went out as a class and collected some rocks and some dirt and some water. And I think we might have had a frog in there, different plants. What we were creating was an entire ecosystem that everything fed upon one another. And I think it's the best analogy, because one of the things that we know about entrepreneurship is that it is about the local mix of variables, which is why the programming that the SBA and Bailey works on, and that Treasury and that Adair works on, is so critical, because it is supporting the players in those different ecosystems. What it means is every single community is a little bit different. As much as every single area of the country may want to brand themselves the Silicon something, whether, we've got Silicon Valley, but we don't need 1,000 other Silicon Slopes, Silicon this, Silicon y'all, Silicon, beach, because everything's going to be different. Silicon Valley has its own mix. It's got silicon in there because that's one of the ecosystem variables. It's where silicon-based chips were built. That's a huge piece of their ecosystem. It's not the same as the ecosystem in Alabama, where I'm from, that has a totally different set of variables. And it's its unique thing. It's like biology. It's like looking at a forest and expecting every single one to look the same around the world. They all look a little bit different. The thing that we know is when you're building something as an entrepreneur, the vast majority of your early stage capital is going to come from within your local ecosystem. You may have dreams of one day bringing in capital from outside of it, but the vast majority of your capital is likely going to come from your ecosystem. One statistic that I think it just jumps out at me every time is the average distance between an entrepreneur and their angel investors is 37 miles. That's a quick drive. 37 miles, that's not very far. Now it grows when you're raising larger amounts of money and you're a much more sophisticated, larger company. You may have further distance, but that local focus is absolutely critical. And that bridges in with what Joe was mentioning about your network. You have to figure out what is in your ecosystem. Who is strong in your ecosystem? It may be your chamber of commerce. It may be one of your local banks that is working with the SBA and helping get some of these different loan programs out into the community. But you have to figure out what is in your ecosystem, what variables are thriving. We in the federal government are trying to help support these ecosystems, but it's up to the entrepreneur to figure out, okay, within my community, what are the resources that I can leverage, and to figure out how to build that network around those resources, because that's where you're going to find success, particularly early on. So that's my lovely, my joke about our press release, which is not a joke, it's a real story. And it just makes me laugh because it really is like little small biological ecosystems that exist in different forms in different communities across the entire country.
Well, and that's why I think it's a great thing about the SBA and the Navigator program. And maybe, maybe you can just touch upon that a little bit, Bailey, because in some regards, Martha, what you've said is actually part of the reason that I think that the SBA put in together this Navigator program to help people really coalesce. Bailey, fill us in on the Navigator program, because, and I know that maybe for some people, they feel like we're getting away from the funding, but all politics is local, all funding starts locally, right? And the Navigator program was kind of put in place to help with this. Bailey, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's such a great point. So for years, the SBA has maintained, these networks of small business development centers, and beyond that, we have our centers for women's business centers. We have the veteran centers, and then, as I spoke about, our innovation accelerator network. What we're seeing and finding across the country is that we have incubators and accelerators popping up all over the place. But when you think about having a strong ecosystem, it's not the disparate organizations, it's how they come together and support that community and strengthen that community. So it is inclusive in creating pathways to support incoming entrepreneurs and those that are part of the community. So the Community Navigators program, we're seeking to help entrepreneurs navigate the resources, the accelerators, the incubators, the banks, the grant programs, all of the different types of resources that may exist in particular geographies, because there's so much going on, but we do know that it is incredibly important to help people understand how it all fits together and to build that community. So we're thrilled about it. I will provide the list of our community navigators, but they are fully focused and dedicated, and frankly, the metrics that they are evaluated by are aligned with creating that support for entrepreneurs within those local communities.
And I just want to add that the folks that are a part of these programs, they want to be able to help. They really want to be. In fact, I had the opportunity after I sold my business and retired out to West Virginia, I began working with a local community college, and they wanted to help people start businesses. And so I started teaching entrepreneurship there, and I got the opportunity to be able to learn about all these amazing resources. One of the things that we had the opportunity to be able to do was hire an SBDC coach, Small Business Development Center coach. That coach worked with different companies of all ranges, starting and newbies and existing companies, to help them navigate some of these things. So for all you entrepreneurs that are out there that are looking for funding, that is also an excellent resource to be able to identify a person in the community that can help you. And the SBDC coach that we hired actually helped an array of businesses. One in particular that made me very happy was their support that they helped to provide expansion to a brewery. And help this brewery get additional funding, a local brewery, and so I wanted to just kind of talk about that for a second, because it really is an important resource that in these communities there are a host of resources that can provide those funding and help you get your house in order, help you figure out your financial statements, and to be able to be in a situation to access capital. Okay, well, I know that we're coming up close to on time here. There is a question in the Q&A that I want to make sure that we address. one of the people asked, when should we start thinking about bringing in an attorney or experts to assist in fundraising in your activities? Now, I don't want to be biased here, but Martha, this is kind of what you
I was about to say, if there's a buzzer, if this is a game show for the questions, can I buzz in and say, can I buy a vowel? And I'd like to go ahead and go for this one.
Martha, please take this one.
So what I would say for those who are thinking, okay, when do I need to bring in an attorney? An attorney is going to cost you money. So bring in an attorney when you have hit the point where you're ready. And then I know that didn't answer your question. I'm getting to it. So what I would say is, first, before you bring in an attorney, you need to learn to speak the language that your lawyer or your accountant is going to speak back to you, so that you're not paying them to also become your legal translator. And the way that you can do that is utilizing the resources that we have put out. There's a link to sec.gov/capital raising. We have got a cutting through the jargon glossary. It has all the lingo in there in plain language that you're going to probably hear shared with you. You'll also see in there a navigator tool that is on our page. Navigator is probably the most overused analogy, but it's a great one. So we're going to stick with it. And SBA and the SEC can just, duke it out over who gets to keep it. I think that we've both invested in it. So we're going to keep the navigator and lots of compass logos. But if you click through that, that asks you a series of questions. And one of the questions asks you some things about before you raise capital. Have you explored other options? And when you click on it, one of the things that you'll find is an acronym that we have before you raise. Get ready with your capital, which is very, catchy, capital, but it is an acronym of all of the different things that you need to be thinking about before you raise your money. So think about, is your cap table in order? Do you have all of your organizational documents ready to go? Your bylaws, everything that you need to run the company. Do you have a plan for your proceeds? What are all of these different things you need to be thinking about before you talk to a lawyer? The lawyer is actually, when you get to capital and you spell it out and you get to the second to last letter, that's when we talk about the bring in your attorneys and advisors. But it's important for you to do your homework first, because there's nothing that is going to drain your bank account faster. And I say this as a lawyer, as somebody who used to bill by the hour, because that was the industry I was in. We're expensive. And you have a lot of resources that are available through the SEC and through the SBA and others that you need to take advantage of before you pick up the phone and talk to somebody who uses the word retainer or hourly fee when they are pitching you on their costs, because it does get expensive and there's resources that you should use first. So that's my big advice to you, is line up the things that you need beforehand before you find an attorney. And then when you do, find someone who has experience doing what you need them to do for you. Do not call your brother-in-law. Do not call the person who did your will. You can call and ask for a referral, but that person probably doesn't have experience helping small businesses navigate. Ask around. Call your local chamber of commerce. Call the local bar association in your community. That's the organization of lawyers. They can help make referrals. But there are a lot of ways to find the person that doesn't just have a law degree, but has background and is specialized in what you need, because they're going to be a lot more efficient with their time and, importantly, with your money.
And I actually want to touch upon this because it's actually broader than just attorneys, right? There are a lot of people out there who will enjoy billing you at the beginning of your business when you are exuberant and have the most amount of funding. And my recommendation, this is Joe's recommendation, you hear and live, is to do your homework first, so that you are retaining that capital so you can apply it in the best possible way to expand your business. What you heard from Martha saying was, look, do your work so you're not spending money on an interpreter. So you go to an attorney and he starts talking about non-dilutive and you don't know necessarily even what that means. Hold on to your cash for as long as possible and do your own homework in order to make sure that you have the ability to spend that money in the best possible way. As an entrepreneur, your job is to become a capital allocator so that you can build your business. I saw a question in here about programs for entrepreneurs that don't have strong networks from Sean. And I just want to say one thing, Sean, your job as an entrepreneur is to expand your network. Go to a chamber of commerce and begin expanding your network, because the reality of the situation is that if you don't do that, at some point, you're going to have to do that. And the earlier, and if you listen to any of the conversations from yesterday of all of the entrepreneurs, one of the things that you'll find is that they've been really good about expanding their network. That's clients, it's customers, it's vendors, it's a whole host of folks that can come to the table to help you support your business. So that is, I would say, probably one of the most important jobs besides figuring out your business model. Adair, I want to go ahead and throw it over to you, see if there's anything you want to add to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. A couple of things on that last point. So in teaching a lot of years, I've advised a lot of entrepreneurs about networking. And personally, actually, I come from a culture in my family where, asking someone for money is super awkward, right? On the financing side, maybe feels better at a bank. But the reality is, think from the other side, a incubator, a seed investor. These people need what they call deal flow, right? They need the entrepreneurs. They're knocking on their door and talking about ideas. Also, the companies that you're going to do upstream, downstream, if if it's relevant and it doesn't affect the nature, of sharing information, they're going to benefit from you as an entrepreneur, what you're bringing to the table. So I think it took me a while to get beyond. I'm not sure I ever recovered from this notion that being out there, talking about what you're doing, talking about your business is something that you're bringing to the table for them too. So if you put that mentality on and follow Joe's advice there, it's really quite helpful for being able to go out into the networks. And this network thing is the thing we're trying to solve for at Treasury, but also Bailey had mentioned as well. And of course, everything Martha does is building more networks, right? Really helping these community networks be available. So look to the state resources, look to the different federal resources, look to your universities and community colleges. As Joe mentioned, the community colleges do amazing things. Some of it, the federal government has some programs through community colleges that'll help do particular, feasibility studies on what you're doing and things like that. Just amazing resources. But you just go out there and you ask, and those people need you too. And so just encouraging that putting a different mentality than what I grew up with.
And Adair, I think that's a really important point. As somebody who's invested in other companies and worked with a lot of other folks who have invested in companies as well, we're looking to go ahead and find opportunities to help, help companies grow, because we have, there's assets and funding that's on the side that they want to go ahead. So that's a really good point is, don't be shy. You're an entrepreneur. This is your baby. You're birthing this baby, and you got to be proud of it and go out there and sell the concept and meet people and put yourself out there. Well, listen, we are coming to the top of the hour, and the next session is going to be on bootstrapping your business with a great bunch of panelists. One last word, anything, each of you, one last second on anything you want to go ahead and impart before we sign off here. Martha.
Can I jump in and piggyback off of what Adair was saying? Because a lot of people don't feel comfortable pitching, whether that is because of the background you grew up in, the values of the family you grew up in, your gender, your race or ethnicity, or any number of variables. One of the best things that you can do is surround yourself with other people who are learning these skills. So I encourage you, find an organization in your community like 1 Million Cups or different groups that are working, or find one of the business centers that the SBA runs that gets entrepreneurs together and learn from other people who are successful. And those are groups that'll help you figure out how to navigate. That again goes back to, as you get ready, figure out what resources exist. Those are free resources. And that's going to help you not only grow your network, but grow the skills that you're going to need to be successful. My last parting note is, if you've got anything that you need, reach out to our office and our team. You can email smallbusiness@sec.gov. Go check out the resources that we've shared on sec.gov/capital raising. And my last note is just a huge thank you, Joe, and the entire team for all that you are putting into National Entrepreneurship Week. I hope that you all got something wonderful out of it. And Bailey and Adair, as always, it's wonderful to see you on the little screen.
Bailey, any parting remarks? Any last thing you want to go ahead and add?
I love it. Wonderful to see everybody. I love the Hollywood squares. And thank you, Joe. I'll just echo some of the points that networks matter so much, and so reach out to incubators, accelerators in your area. Reach out to small business development centers, to women's business centers. They are there to help you build your network, and that will make it easier to figure out the pathway to capital. And the last point is just that it's not all about venture capital. Venture capital funds a small percentage of new businesses that are started every single year. So start first with identifying how to build the company, build the network. Like you said, Joe, get your house in order, and then think about the type of capital that you need for the business that you are growing. And the federal government is here behind the scenes in many ways, trying to power the ecosystem of support and the flow of capital to businesses across all corners of the country.
Kelly, I'll say that capital is really important. Outside capital, I never wanted anybody in my business. Okay, I never wanted anyone up in my business. So I go ahead and agree 100%. Adair, take us home. Any last words of wisdom?
No, I didn't put the SSBCI information in the chat like my colleagues did. So, but if you want,
we put it in there. We put it in there.
But if you want to connect your state offices that are doing these types of programs, please send us a note and we'll be happy to pass along that information. And it's been an honor being here, Joe and Bailey and Martha.
Well, thank you so much for this enlightening panel. We really, really appreciate it. Have a great weekend. And hopefully, we want to invite you guys back again soon. We can go ahead and maybe do a deeper dive next time. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Martha, Bailey, and Adair, have a good weekend. And thank you for all this fantastic advice and information.
Thanks, everyone.
So next up, we're going to go ahead and have a bootstrapping a conversation about bootstrapping your business, and really what that means and what that looks like. We're going to hear from folks who have done it. We're going to hear from folks who are doing it. How you go ahead, as I said on the previous call, in the previous video, I don't like folks in my business. I like to go ahead and have control. I don't want somebody telling me what to do, when to go, where to be. You're seeing some smiling faces here because I think there's probably resonates with a lot of these entrepreneurs. So listen, it couldn't please me more to go ahead and introduce the host of this panel, Christopher Wood, an amazing entrepreneur, a creative entrepreneur, has started a number of different initiatives. And so with that, Chris, welcome. I am going to go get some water and hand it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us here today. I'm honored to be here. As Joe mentioned, I am a serial entrepreneur. I am the co-founder and creator of a company called Redwood & Co., which does home fragrance, as well as the co-founder and creator of LGBT Tech, which is a national LGBT tech nonprofit. So really happy to be here and really honored to be here. Entrepreneurship is definitely in my lifeblood. And I have a lot of experience bootstrapping businesses together. I still feel like I'm doing it on a daily basis. We have some incredible panelists with us here today. And so I'm going to go ahead and start turning it over to them. And I think we'll start with Courtney.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. My name is Courtney Duffy. I'm really happy to be here today with you, Chris, as well as Kayvon and Nikki and everybody else here. Thank you so much for having me. I work at Patreon, which is an internet platform that enables entrepreneurs, mostly from the creative sector, to grow and scale their business by offering monthly memberships to their biggest fans, which earns them a recurring kind of monthly revenue stream that they can rely on. I am part of Patreon's policy team, so I work to develop guidelines that keep Patreon a safe online destination where creative entrepreneurship can thrive. So that's me.
Fantastic. Turn it over to Kayvon.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm Kayvon. I'm on the investment team at Village Capital. And so really what we do is we have this high-level mission of democratizing the access to entrepreneurship. And so we do that across the globe and also based here in DC. And so we have a number of different accelerator programs where founders can apply and learn about kind of the investment process and whether that's even the right path for them or not. And so we mainly work with people who are at the very earliest stages of starting their businesses. And I'm excited to talk more about, some of the things that we share in terms of whether you should raise capital or not.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least, Nikki.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield. I'm the founder and host of a YouTube channel and news website called transportevolve.com. As you can tell from my accent, wasn't born in the United States, but I'm now a citizen of the US, having emigrated here in 2015. And it was thanks to Patreon that I was able to grow my business in the United States, stand on my own 2 feet. And we've gone from a small business that really made very little money to a company that grossed over $180,000 last year. And we now employ 4 people.
It's fantastic. So I'm going to dive right into the dialogue because I know we don't have a ton of time. So finding financial capital to run your business when you're first starting out, as you just heard from Nikki, can be a huge challenge. I know personally, bootstrapping your business means potentially taking funding from family or friends, or there's various platforms now that you can do that to start and grow a business. I know this very personally because my husband and I started our company Redwood & Co. and it has literally, I feel like we've just thrown all kinds of things against the wall to see what sticks and trying to feel out what works. But all along that way, we've had to do just that. We've had to borrow money from family. We've had to take out capital loans. There's a lot of fintech opportunities out there now. And that has allowed us to really ebb and flow with the growth of the business, but also allowed us to pivot from opening a store to going online to closing a store down, being in brick and mortar, going to wholesale shows and getting our products out there. So that capital is extremely important, regardless of how old your business is. I think we just crossed over the 6-year mark, which is a great place to be, but still growing and talking about new opportunities. I just feel like the pools of money just keep getting bigger. So I want to turn it over to Kayvon first. I know you have supported a huge range of emerging founders. Can you share a little bit more information about that and maybe kind of kick us off on this capital and fundraising component?
Yeah, definitely. So my first time really working with founders was a really random experience. It was like an informal opportunity I had to work with 2 young entrepreneurship groups in Uganda through a family friend who does a lot of work there. And both of these businesses were bootstrapping. One of them was an educational farm to teach more modern agricultural practices. The other one was a grant consultancy. And so at that point, I kind of realized that there is a lack of resources in the region there just to be able to understand, okay, what are the next steps I need to take, whether it is raising capital or not. And so that led me to start an organization called MZZ. And so we basically connect young professionals to these different startups in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia to help them work on specific projects that match the needs of the startup and the young professionals. And so through that, I've gotten to work with agricultural companies and fintech companies, whatever it is, and whatever their fundraising or non-fundraising intentions are. And that essentially kicked off my interest in just working with founders in general. And so through Village Capital, we honestly work with a similar range of companies. We work with founders that are also working in ag tech or fintech or health tech. And so we have these specific accelerator programs based in the region and based on a specific type of company. So for example, ag tech. And so the idea is that we can bring together a group of like-minded people that are working on similar businesses to learn from each other, first and foremost. And we've actually set up the way the funding process is at the end, where the power isn't in any investor's hands, it's in the entrepreneur's hands to essentially, after learning about one another, decide, who deserves the funding out of this group. But in a lot of cases, founders during the course of our program will learn that the type of business I'm working on, I don't necessarily want funding. I don't want somebody to own some of my business. I don't need somebody to own some of my business. And so there's a lot of interesting nuances in terms of like when you're starting your business, because a lot of people will do it because they like the idea of getting funding and, you know, having that process go along with it. But when you actually sit down and think about what your goals are, I think, you know, it can shed some light on what you're really doing. But yeah, wide range of businesses and exciting stuff.
That's fantastic. I'll come back to you in just a minute. Now, Nikki, I know in the introduction you had mentioned that Patreon was a big component of your success. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe how raising that capital yourself through Patreon or other platforms that you found successful. Talk about that success for you and how that worked, how that looked.
So my channel, I probably should preface this by saying I trained as a classical musician. I was a classical oboist. I spent 10 years as a music teacher and musician. I graduated from one of London's top music schools, and I really enjoyed doing that as a career. However, I wanted to get into the world of electric vehicles. I've always been a car nerd. And when I was very, very young, there was a very transformative experience that occurred to me in the UK. There was a major flood that damaged the marshland where my father grazed cattle. He lost his job. We had to move. Ironically, a similarly powerful storm is hitting the same part of the UK today. And so when I got into podcasting as a fun thing in the UK, initially it was under an umbrella company that I jointly owned with my wife. She was an IT consultant. And so any profits that she made helped offset any losses that we made from my side of the business. But when we decided to emigrate to the US, it was a sink or swim moment. And so I didn't want to open up, as you yourself talked about, didn't want to open up to having somebody bring in a load of capital, but also bringing a load of control. One of the things that's, you know, at the foundation of my company is that we retain impartiality, we retain financial independence. Nobody on the team is allowed to have any positions on any of the companies we follow. And so having kind of outside sponsor money or donations soured that slightly. So we decided to go the Patreon route. And we'd started off by just accepting PayPal donations, but that caused its own issues, namely that we were unable to comply with VATMOS law in Europe. And I'm sure a lot of the people watching this will be familiar with VATMOS if they sell goods and services overseas. The too long didn't read is that you have to document the addresses of all of your customers in Europe. You have to get 2 different forms of proof from where they live. You have to make sure that you apply the right taxes on whatever it is you're selling them. Then you have to register with each individual member state of the EU and individually submit and pay the paperwork for that. When you're starting a small business and you're not a fan of paperwork, the concept of collecting all of that documentary evidence, having to keep it safe, obviously, because it's personal, private information, and then submitting the relevant tax documentation however many times a year, be it quarterly or yearly. If you just think about the number of hours that that takes up, we were faced with a position where we said we cannot offer accepting donations from PayPal anymore. We're going to have to use a third party. And it was a bit of a blessed moment because Patreon came into my view. I think it was in its first year, and Patreon had the genius moment to go, hey, we will take care of VATMOS. We will take care of local taxes. We will do all of that filing for you. And as a creator, your relationship technically is with us, and we are having that relationship with all the different people who are supporting you. And that enabled me to set aside the nightmare of all that paperwork and then focus on doing what I wanted to do, which was grow my business. So that was the key accelerator for me to growing my Patreon income. Now, since then, if someone lives in the United States and say, hey, we want to send you a check, that is totally okay because, you know, we have a post box. People can send us money, but we have to be very careful about where we receive money from a compliance point of view. And I think as a startup business, especially if you're trying to kickstart or crowdfund your way into, your first few years of existence, laws like that can be very scary. And so online funding opportunities are kind of restricted in those early days. And that's why we chose Patreon.
That's fantastic. And I think you also bring up a really good point and underscore. You kind of talked about it. It's not just bootstrapping and finding the funding, but it's also about bootstrapping and allocating your time appropriately as a founder, which can be really daunting because you start going down a path and realize that you have to fill out all this paperwork or comply in some way. And so I think, in some of the exchange between entrepreneurs and also resources out there, also finding resources that are truly key to helping entrepreneurs do their best work, which is working on their business or working in their business.
Absolutely. And financial planning has never been a strong point of mine. Learning, I think, and that's as a startup and a small business owner, one of the key lessons is learning, is my time more valuable growing my business, or is it more valuable at this point doing the things that I need to do behind the scenes? A good example is when it comes to finances and bookkeeping. Mm-hmm. Do you need to pay someone else a nominal fee every month to go over your bank statements with you and make sure that your books are in order? That's something that we personally decided to do last year.
Absolutely.
We just didn't have the time to reconcile the books. There were questions we didn't really understand. So being able to delegate and setting aside a value on your time as a founder of a business, I pay myself well below minimum wage. I haven't paid myself since November.
Don't we all?
It's very easy for us in this startup world as business founders and entrepreneurs to downplay the financial and time benefits of our role and getting other people to do it. So delegation is definitely key. And effectively, that's what I did with Patreon. I delegated all of that backroom tax stuff to someone else.
Absolutely. So let's, on the Patreon stream, let's go ahead and turn it over to Courtney. Courtney, how have you really seen this change the world for entrepreneurs, and how can you kind of build on what Nikki was talking about? Dive right in.
Hearing from creators like Nikki is just one of my favorite parts of this job. And I can tell you there are more than 250,000 creative entrepreneurs who have done the same kind of trajectory that Nikki did in turning to Patreon to build their business, which is really kind of wild. There's over 8 million people who have supported their favorite business in this way. And, I think the internet has really democratized these resources that do allow people to grow their businesses. You don't have to have an MBA to have access to these resources that maybe feel like a burden, as Nikki mentioned. There are resources out there, and Patreon is one of them. So, Patreon is really allows creative entrepreneurs to kind of establish a recurring kind of sustainable income from their top fans, cultivate community with them, and really kind of deepen their relationships with those supporters. So we're at a point now where Patreon creators are earning over $100 million every single month. And since our founding in 2013, they've earned over 3.5 billion with a B. So the scale of this is really just kind of astronomical. And certainly during the COVID pandemic, you can imagine entrepreneurs who maybe were stand-up comedians or musicians or music venues. So all of a sudden didn't have this reliable income that they were otherwise kind of had their heart set on, right? If no one can go anywhere, that sort of changes the landscape for everybody. And so we had even more people turning to Patreon, not just to grow their businesses themselves, but also for people who wanted to support business. They would become members and fans and support on Patreon. So it's really been quite a whirlwind. We're continuing to grow and scale. And like I said, it's being able to hear stories like like Nikki that really make it all worthwhile.
Absolutely. I think one of the questions that just popped up is, what advice would you have for people? Courtney, we'll have you jump in, but what advice would you have for people that are just starting to create their Patreon? Or do you have some resources that you could direct them to?
Absolutely. So I should mention there's more than 400 employees now at Patreon. So many of whom are devoted every single day to developing educational kind of workshops and programming that can really make the process of getting on board with Patreon a lot easier. So if you just go to patreon.com, depending on what type of business you have, whether you're maybe a podcaster or a musician, or you own like a music venue or that sort of thing, there are different sort of recommendations or models that you can follow that others in that same kind of sphere have used, that you can use as sort of a template to get you kind of set up. And the educational programming is really devoted to helping creators grow and scale the business, of course, but also doing so without breaking the bank, without kind of experiencing burnout and dealing with these kind of unsexy topics like what to do about health insurance and email marketing and taxes and outsourcing to freelancers, all these really kind of crucial elements that entrepreneurs have to deal with on an everyday basis that go into running a business and growing a business. So there's all sorts of programming that, like I said, some of my colleagues really devote, more than 40 hours a week, if you will, to delivering.
Absolutely. So I think I want to, one of the areas we often use things like Square and Shopify for our business and growing our business, because we're actually selling physical products and producing and manufacturing those. I think, a lot of those platforms from a fintech perspective have started offering capital based on your daily sales. Kayvon, I think as I'm thinking about if I was even thinking about approaching a capital fund, it would almost feel daunting. And I think we've all been there. If you're an existing entrepreneur or a brand new entrepreneur, walking into a bank seems almost daunting in the amount of paperwork that you have to provide. But I think one area maybe a lot of people don't have a lot of experience with, especially new entrepreneurs that are trying to get an idea off the ground, is approaching a capital firm and talking to a capital firm. Can you just kind of talk a little bit more about that, and what are some of the things to expect or things to do? Maybe give some helpful tips about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say like the two most common types of capital that can be invested in your business are debt and then equity. So if you're thinking about taking out a loan or doing some type of revenue share agreement where, the person who provides you capital takes a piece of your revenue for a short period of time, you need to really be conscious about, how profitable is your business at this moment, because taking out a loan could be something very bad for your business if you haven't thought that through. And I'm sure the provider of that loan will also be somebody who's conscious of that. But then switching over to equity, you need to think about what your long-term goals are as a founder. Are you looking to sell your business eventually? Are you looking to have some type of public sale where eventually the investors will get their money back? If not, and this is more of a lifestyle business, this is what you want to do, period, or you don't want to be rushed into something like that, then equity is probably not the right thing for you, because essentially what it is an investor is buying a piece of your business and expecting that portion that they bought will be worth a lot more in the future. And a lot of these investors, don't want to wait for you to have a long-term, fun with your business. They like to see returns within a period of time. And so I think really just thinking about your personal goals is the most important thing in terms of deciding if, okay, I want to raise capital or I want to take out a loan. Thinking about your personal goals and what you want to achieve in the short term, but also long term is really important, because it's a big commitment to have somebody invest in your business and essentially having some ownership of it, and like Nikki mentioned, having some control over it. So I would say those are the biggest considerations. And yeah, what investors like to look for are those potentials for return. And Village Capital specifically, like there's a big range of impact investors popping up now. And so what we like to look for in addition to that is like, how can we measure the impact that you're having on the population that you're serving? And each investor will have different criteria, but I think as a founder, it's really just like, what are your personal goals? What do you want to achieve? And what do you need to really scale your business to where you want it to be?
That's all really great advice. I think on the same side, Nikki, you kind of alluded to and talked about something that I know I, as an entrepreneur, know is that everybody that around me makes more than I do for my business. Because we always pay ourselves the least because we're constantly reinvesting that money into our business to help it grow. And that, quite frankly, for 6 years, I've never taken a paycheck from my company. And so can you kind of talk about the way that you kind of bootstrap this and maybe give advice for other aspiring creative entrepreneurs like yourself, and how, maybe some things that you learned along the ways that you kind of wish you had somebody to say like, hey, have you thought about it this way? Or have you tried this way? I think it'd be really helpful for some of our viewers.
I think, and this ties back to the earlier question about what advice would you have for people who want to start with Patreon? The first thing I think about the crowd supported business economy, I think is probably what I'd like to call it, is that you should start a business doing what you love, because to begin with, that is going to be your only gratification. It is not a crusade. It is not a get rich quick scheme. And in order to benefit and to grow with an economy like Patreon, with an economy like the YouTube creator platform, where you charge YouTube memberships, or any of the other different ways you can earn money, Ko-fi, etc. The only way you're going to do that is if you already have an established base for what it is, whether it is you are an artist and you want to submit a picture every week to your team, or maybe you are a woodworker, or maybe you are a musician, or maybe you are a journalist. Building your reputation has to come before you build your money. And this is one of these very key moments where those early steps of incubation are essentially you working in the evenings, kickstarting your business through sweat, before you're in a position to then turn around and say to people, hey, would you like to pay me to continue to do this? I think one of the biggest challenges and one of the mistakes I see very commonly happen is that people feel disenfranchised with their job. We've seen a massive growth in people just turning up to work and giving the boss, the single finger. And that is both very dangerous from a business perspective, but also from a financial perspective. You need to have that base, you need to have that credibility, that reliability, that fan base in order to leverage any of these creator platforms to fund. And I think I knew that when I started, but I didn't realize how essential it was. The other thing that I'm learning even today, 6 years into having the company, 7 years into having the company in the US, and the company itself is in its 10th, 11th year, is that diversity is key. Do not over rely on one platform. For YouTubers right now, YouTube is quite openly changing the way it's monetizing things. Every YouTuber I know has seen a massive drop in their revenue month on month, and compared to year on year from last year. And the YouTubers that are doing well, the creators that are doing well, are the ones that have multiple forms of revenue, whether it's a concert that they're selling tickets to, whether it's consultancy work on the side, whether it's individual commissioned pieces from fans and audience members. And I think that's the key that I have learned, is having that diversity in your skill set, in your toolbox, is essential. The other thing I would caution is it's very easy to get stuck in the, oh wow, this is amazing, and everything is amazing, and jumping on everything as it happens. I've learned that it's all too easy to get swept up in the promise of something happening and then being extremely upset when it doesn't. It's like any other business. You know, if you have a business meeting with a supplier and they say, yes, we can supply you with the goods you need to make the product that you want to sell to people, and we're going to sell it to you for this price. But it's not until you've gone through the process of making sure that it is actually the right product and you do actually have what you need being delivered to you, that you're actually then in a position that you can then start getting excited about selling that product. And I think, you know, there is that mentality in the creator space where the equivalent of a letter of intent gets overhyped to the point that you start then making financial decisions based off the back of that, only to then get burned down the line. So I think I would advise people to practice their stoicism and their skepticism, and to sit back when something good is, you know, coming down the pipeline. Don't shout and scream it. Don't get overly excited. Just be ready for that good news to turn into bad news. Be prepared to wait until you absolutely know that the thing you want to happen is going to happen, and then you can act on it.
Prepare for the worst and be
Hope for the best
when it's the best.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Listen, I just want to jump on for just a second because I put the comment in there, but yesterday we heard from Norm Lewis, who is an acclaimed Broadway actor. And I just want to underscore your point, Nikki, and also point out my embarrassment of texting this to everybody. But the reality is that he really honed in on this point of diversification strategy and talked about the fact that he, as a Broadway performer, world-renowned, acclaimed, that even for somebody like him, the reason why he's interested in entrepreneurship is because his talents may change at some point. You know, he talked about his beautiful voice and his ability to perform, but how that may change at some point. And so I just wanted to go ahead and hone in on that point, because that diversification piece, particularly as we saw with the pandemic and the changes that took place, are absolutely, it's a critical, important point. And for anybody that's listening, the idea that you're putting all your eggs in one basket, look, it's changed. Take a look at what happened with Facebook, right? And how their model has changed because Apple has changed the algorithms and the privacy settings. So I just wanted to jump in there and underscore that point. Chris, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the things that I mentioned, but as I was thinking about it from maybe a new entrepreneur's perspective of a lot of entrepreneurs are reinvesting their money all the time, not taking a paycheck. So how are they living? And so, you know, thinking about that of like, to Nikki's point is, don't run in and quit your job because you have a brilliant idea. Don't, you know, if you have a spouse that is working, you know, don't pull both of you into the business at the same time. You know, I had one business that was able to pay a salary to me while the other business still continues to reinvest every dollar or invest in our employees, because I don't have as much time to focus on that, but I have really good employees to focus on the things I need done over there, and maximizing my time. So I think it's really important these are kind of these nuts and bolts pieces of bootstrapping a company and coming up with an idea and getting it, you know, together, is that a lot of people see the end result and the amazing, you know, built platform or community or, you know, or product. But I think a lot of times the entrepreneurs aren't speaking about everything that went into that because it was just a lot, or there were decisions made and really late nights, you know, that helped make that, or really long days that helped make that possible. But then all these little decisions about how to still live, how to still be able to function while you're chasing your dream is really, really important.
I would just like to, don't want to monopolize it, but I'd just like to add into that a couple of things there, Chris. You know, on the topic of paying yourself and how much you pay, I like to set myself baseline, which is below minimum wage based on what I actually pay myself for the hours I work, but is enough to ensure that I am comfortable in my home. I haven't been able to do it for you know, since November for multiple reasons related to all kinds of things out of my control. But the other thing I would say is, if you're making self-assessment or you know, quarterly tax submissions. I'm not a tax expert, but I've always found it's easier from a small business perspective to pay more tax than I absolutely think I actually need to do. Because then when you do your taxes in January, February, March, that April tax return that you send off to the IRS, it is such a nice feeling to get a rebate that you can then inject back into the business if you want, rather than getting a bill from the IRS going, you owe us $5,000. Also, in terms of diversification, one of the keys that we've found here at Transport Evolved is it's important to know the individual skills, interests, and strengths of your team members. So there are things that we now do that we are charging companies for that have got nothing to do with our main customer-facing portal that are actually helping us bring in money. So we've done third-party video production and animation work. We have an amazing animator on staff. We have a new videographer who joined us, who was an amazing video editor. And we are just about to start effectively selling him out for a day or two at a time to local companies who want to produce ads, because we have the equipment and the skills, and we can earn more doing that in 2 days than we can earn in 2 weeks getting money from other sources. So being able and having a staff that understands that that's part of the process is also very important.
Absolutely. I know that, so for those that are watching it, please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A. We want to make sure that we're hitting on things that are important to you, that we're answering things that are important to you. So I wanted to shift just a little bit, because I think there's another side of this, which is there's the bootstrapping your business. And we've also talked about time commitments and how are you spreading your time. But I think another really important part of being a business owner, and a business owner, regardless of whether you're going after venture capital funds, whether you're looking for investors or you're looking to take out a loan, is really that mentor piece and being a mentee. And then furthermore, when you're down the line, when you have the opportunity to be a mentor to someone who is coming up, that relationship for me with many mentors has been crucial to ensuring that I'm not making mistakes, that I'm talking to folks that are key. So Kayvon, I'm wondering, through your experience, it sounds like you have a lot of international experience, which is a whole nother level of operating in the business world. Can you kind of talk a little bit about this mentor-mentee and the importance of it? Maybe some examples of what you've seen and how they've worked. Just kind of anything in that realm would be, I think, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, when I was starting MZZ, it really was just like the idea of going from chapter to chapter and having students from each university, working on teams. And then I reached a point where it was really hard to find somebody at a school that was interested in starting a whole organization on their own. And so I started reaching out to people who worked in the space. I actually ended up reaching out to somebody at Village Capital before working at Village Capital. And his name was Rob Tashima, and he was our chief growth officer for quite some time. But I reached out to him, and I had a question of, how do I gain specific knowledge in these different markets that we work in, to kind of pass on to the individuals who are working with these companies. And he provided a lot of insight on that. But the other question I had was like, as somebody who works on growth specifically, what do I do basically? I didn't have a specific question, but he started to ask me to kind of reframe what I'm doing and thinking about it more through the lens of like, what is the value being exchanged versus how do I want it to work? And that wasn't something I acted on immediately, but just having a mentor, putting a thought in my head when I have tunnel vision and having the words echo when I go into different situations, I think that's like the beauty of it. And it went from a chapter to chapter thing to something where anybody in the world can be a part of this if they have an interest in supporting a startup in a developing country. And at the same time, with Village Capital, this is kind of at scale, this mentorship where we run these programs, but we're not the experts on every question that comes into play. And so what we really focus on is bringing in a lot of different mentors that will be able to touch on these different needs in whatever country or sector that the program is focused on. And a lot of these relationships grow from just a 15-minute conversation in a breakout room on Zoom, or in-person one way back when that was a thing. And I think like the beauty of it is it's not just like, okay, I'm going to talk to somebody for 30 minutes and they're going to change my business. It's more like, how can I bring in different perspectives from people who've seen things and done things maybe tangentially related or directly related to what I'm doing, and just pop an idea that can start as a sprout and then grow into something bigger. And I think just bringing in different perspectives like that, it can have short-term benefits, but also the long-term benefits in building relationships is, I think, really, really important.
I completely agree. I think what you said about, I feel like so many mentees, get into a mentor situation. They have a burning question for someone who obviously has expertise in the field, and they ask the question, and the response is like, well, that you didn't even answer my question. But in a way, what they've done is challenge your thought process. And so what you kind of talked about is challenging that thought process that then didn't answer the question immediately, but every time you're walking to situations, it was bouncing around in your head, and you're like, oh, I get it. It's like, and I think that's a really powerful statement that I really haven't heard a lot, but things that I've definitely felt where, several years down the road, I'm like, oh, that's what they meant. Oh, that's why I'm at this point. So that's a really, really, really good point. Courtney, do you kind of have anything on the mentee mentor stuff? I know it's a little bit different for you just kind of in the position you sit, but I would love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Chris. I think during the pandemic, it's sort of redefined in some ways how we forge connections. So you weren't necessarily going to get coffee with a mentor or mentee in the way that you might have in years past. And so it's been really a learning opportunity for everybody to find new ways to make connections with people, right? And so among Patreon creators, they really have turned to some kind of digital platforms to build community that sometimes will kind of peel off into one-on-one mentor-mentee relationships, but also at times really just the ability to share a problem that's going on with them and ask, has anyone else gone through this before? So a lot of Patreon creators turn to Discord for that, which is an instant messaging and digital distribution platform that folks may or may not have heard of here. And there are all these different channels within Discord where creators just joining Patreon can kind of introduce themselves, or all sort of thematic channels, if you will, where folks can just draw connection and find answers to problems that they wouldn't have been able to easily solve, working on their own. So I think it's one of those cases where many minds together can really help the innovation and the creative process kind of blossom. So that, I think, has been a really important learning for all of us during these really kind of difficult last couple of years.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in here on this whole idea of sort of mentorship and the notion of, our last call, and it's actually coursed throughout the entire conversations that we've had this week, is the importance of networks and networking, and really going out there. I would say probably the biggest responsibility outside of defining the sales process for your business and understanding how you're going to bring in money is this networking piece. The ability to be able to speak with and meet with and reach out to and be proactive. On the last call that we had with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Small Business Administration, the US Department of Treasury, the Treasury Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission did a survey, and they found that the second biggest issue that folks have is access to networks. Right? So when we talk about mentoring and, folks who are going to be guiding us and coaching us, I also want to go ahead and just make sure that we really put a finer point on this idea that mentors can be, in an instant for a second. And entrepreneurship is lifelong learning. It's not an accident that we start off this week with education. every day, day in and day out as an entrepreneur, Nikki learns something new about her business, about her customers, and look at Chris. Chris is laughing too, because he knows it, right? About his suppliers, something changes, this changes. Oh, a pandemic happens, right? So lifelong learning takes place with entrepreneurs. And it's part of the reason that I love hanging out with entrepreneurs, is because we're so fascinated by the opportunities to grow new business and new business ideas. And I think that one of the things that, when you look at creatives and these folks who are creative, they want to go ahead and focus on these creative ideas. But as Nikki said, they don't necessarily always have these other aspects of the business that they have to run, that you have to run, right? And so the ability to be able to tap into, programs like this. And also we talked about the local networks within people's communities. And I think that continues, to be important. When you're talking about entrepreneurship and this idea of building out your business, it doesn't get enough focus. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this, but I can tell you 100%, I teach it. I'm writing a book about it. The reality is that there is just not enough focus on the fact that in order to build your business, your network becomes your net worth. And the more people you know, the more opportunities. And we kind of honed in on that in the previous piece. I'm curious, Courtney, you guys have a lot of folks on your platform. I'm curious what your thoughts are, on that networking piece in particular.
Yeah, Joe, I think that is spot on. That really resonates with me. I think in the creative sector, but with innovation and entrepreneurship, and frankly, life in general, I think any opportunity that you as an individual can take to, in speaking with someone and hearing about a problem that they have, even if you don't have the solution, you probably know someone who would really love to talk to them and kind of try to broker these connections. It's the sort of thing that really can add value to those in your life. And it's also sort of the thing that I've found at least can kind of come back around. I mean, there are folks who, you maybe haven't talked to in a few years, but would be really happy to just hear from you and would love to just catch up over coffee, over a quick call. And any time that you can, help kind of shepherd two people who have similar goals together, I think really benefits them, and it can benefit you in the long run too.
Yeah, like Chris, let me ask you, because you have been serving as the moderator of this panel, but I'm just curious, you haven't had a huge opportunity to weigh in on your own thoughts on some of these things. What's your thought? What have you found as a business? You're a successful business owner. You've done a lot of different things.
I mean, I think that driving towards a successful business and what is success is all in the eyes of the beholder. But for me, it's really been about continuing to give back. Some of my core values is giving back to the community, giving back, really building a strong team, putting out a very, a good quality product, and pivoting, where we absolutely must, and also where we can, to continue to grow the business. For me, I think at my core, it wasn't about what we were producing, but it was about the connections. It was about the product that we were putting out was good quality, that wasn't impacting the environment in a particular way. So a lot of those core values really bubbled up for me, and I think really produced a product that is really good, whether that is the nonprofit side or whether it's the manufacturing side in home fragrance. A lot of the core values are the same. As to Joe's point, the education never stops. I'm consistently learning about, do I bring this in-house? Do I leave that out of house? Can I find someone that is doing it better, faster, stronger than I am? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? And how is that working for them? Is it something I should do? Learning is a constant thing for me. And I think for a long time, I felt I have equivalent to an associate's degree. I tried to go to college. I constantly butted heads with my professors. And I just started finding my own path. I started looking around for my own path. I started in nonprofits. I ended up working for Discovery Communications and marketing. I worked for a newspaper within marketing before founding and starting LGBT Tech, and really kind of marrying some of the technology piece and that love and the communication with people and explaining how this impacts. And a lot of those things wouldn't have been possible if in an art gallery, I didn't say hello to Joe. I've known Joe for many years now, but it was all over. I attended one event. I said hello to the right person, and then I just kept picking up the phone, for better or for worse. I think for better, but
I wanted to circle back because the title of this is really about bootstrapping, right? And Chris, I know the journey that you've been on, and Nikki, it's been great to learn more about, you know, the journey that you've been on, and Kayvon and Courtney, certainly the number of folks who are participating on your platform. Chris, one of the things that I remember, and I hope it's okay for me to tell this, is that you looked at you've used a couple of these platforms, Shopify and Square, and you were able to go ahead. Can you just talk for just a second? Because that's kind of a new area of potentially tapping into that as well, to be able to get a loan. And how does that work for folks who are listening here who may be thinking about, hey, I don't want to go ahead, I don't have good credit, or I don't this and that. Talk a little bit about how that worked early in your business.
So we had a brick and mortar store, and we were constantly, as you are running sales through your platform, through your POS, your point of sale, through Square Up or Shopify, they're actually looking at the data. They're looking at the data of your sales. And then they have partnered either internally, or they've partnered with financial houses that are actually willing to loan you money based on the amount of sales coming through your platform consistently over a period of time. And they will offer you a certain amount of money that is then paid back, a percentage. They'll go ahead and charge a finance charge of a percentage. So if you borrow $3,000, they may charge you $3,500 to borrow that money. But the key about that type of situation is if I don't make any money today, I don't pay anything back on that capital loan, because they're taking money out every single day that you're paying sales. Basically, every transaction you run through, they're pulling a little bit out of that until you pay it back in full. We've now done that in over the last 6 years. We've probably borrowed somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $350,000. But none of it falls on my credit. It's not impacting my credit at all. It is all based on the sales that we have and the return. If I have a slow month, then I'm not cutting into the things that I need in order to keep growing my business and successful. It's another option. I think that fintech has really allowed entrepreneurs to build and grow, where you don't have to go to family and you don't have to go to friends and get into those uncomfortable conversations, or where they're like, hey, where's my money this month? Like, you owe me $900 this month. And you're like, I didn't have any sales this month. So it's another option that's out there and available through some of these platforms that I think has leveled the playing field a bit. It doesn't matter about your background. It matters what you're doing. And if you're selling, at the end of the day, if you're selling a product, they're willing to give you money. And if you keep selling, they're willing to loan you more money. And that's the key. It's all based on what you're selling, how well you're selling it, and how well you're running your business. That's what it comes down to.
And I think that's a really important point for a lot of the folks who are listening, who want to start a business, and this access to capital piece, because there's a little bit of a gap here. I'm going to be honest. I've studied this market. I know the market. I've worked with tons of entrepreneurs. There is this gap between what you can go to a bank for and if you're starting out as an entrepreneur. But what we're finding is that there's organizations and institutions like Village Capital and other organizations, and Patreon is a good example of that, where you really, as an entrepreneur, I'm going to go ahead and speak to the entrepreneurs out there listening for a second. It's your job to figure this stuff out. That's your job. Your job is to figure out the business model, how money's going to come in, who's going to pay you for this stuff, and also to put it in a strategy of diversification so that you have the ability to be able to withstand the ups and downs of your business, but also grow it. Chris, I didn't mean to co-opt the panel, but you have such great, what you've just provided is just an important mechanism that people can go ahead and grow their business in ways that many people may not have really understood. And I think it's important for them to hear that. Well, we have only a couple minutes left, and I do want to make sure that everybody has the ability to sort of get a last word in. So Kayvon, why don't we start with you, then Nikki, then Courtney, and then Chris, you can bring us home.
Yeah, definitely. I guess on the topic of bootstrapping, especially talking about it in 2022, like has been mentioned a lot, there's a lot of platforms that you can leverage, whether you have a blue collar business, whether you're a designer, whether you're a creative, that can put you in front of customers, that can help you create your online store, that can help you get access to loans, that can help your business level up and go from 0 to 1. And I think, leveraging, the resources available simply through a Google search, exactly what you want. A lot of times, like what you're looking for is out there, and you can create a profile for your business and get access to customers. But in general, when you're starting a company, I would just, really focus on what your personal goals are and, why you're starting the company, to just figure out whether you need to bootstrap, whether you'll eventually need access to some lending, whether you need venture capital. I think just having some self-reflection before you jump into it is really important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Nikki, thoughts?
So I think as you grow your business and you learn what your strengths and weaknesses are and what the strengths and the weaknesses of your team are, I think it's okay to feel scared. It's okay not to know the answers, and it's okay to reach out and ask for help. One of the cool things about Patreon is that Discord community that is very supportive, very welcoming. And if you have come across a blocker, you can guarantee that somebody else has either suffered the same problem or a similar problem. But I think also what is really important as you're striving to build your business, to bootstrap yourself, is to remember that there is a life outside of your business. It is something that I have failed to do on multiple occasions. I have 2 teenagers who are adults now. I think one of my biggest regrets is not spending enough time with them. And I think it's important that you balance work and home, because at the end of the day, you might have a mission with your business, but your business should not be your reason to exist.
Fantastic words of advice. Courtney, do you want to go ahead and just share?
Yeah, sure, Joe. I think there is a lot of research that shows that not everybody has the same access to certain privileges, right? White men have kind of quantitatively more access to capital and so on. So I think it's really important that those who have sort of made their way do try to find folks who they can help lift up, whether it's women entrepreneurs or minorities or what have you. But I think what's great about the rise of these online platforms that enable people to kind of capitalize off of and make a living off of their unique skills and interests is that it does democratize the playing field a little bit. And so, I think that the more kind of different types of folks who really kind of take the leap and bootstrap their way into the entrepreneurial space, I think the better off the world will be.
Chris, take us home.
Awesome. So I have 3. One is make a sale every day, always sell. That's your job as a business. 2 is learn every day. It's your job to learn something every day, learn something about your business and make not only yourself better, but those around you better. And then 3 is surround yourself with those who you most want to be like. I'm not talking about some of the like, Tim Cook or, the leader of Google. Like, sure, we would all love to be surrounded by them and just listen to them for a little bit, but surround yourself with those who emulate the things that you want in life. That may be a particular freedom. It may be the ability to spend time with your kids while still having a successful business. When you surround yourself with people who you look up to and who you most want to be like and who emulate a life that you really like, you will learn from them just by being around them. And then in return, when you get to that point, being able to look around you and inspire those and provide the same that those individuals gave to you by giving it back to other people is important. So those are my 3 takeaways to bootstrapping your business, because literally if you're doing those things every day, you will learn, you will grow, you will build, you'll learn from your mistakes, and you'll be able to have a successful business.
Well, what a fantastic panel. Thank you, each of you, for this panel. As you can see from the notes, people are just super learning so much. And so I want to thank each of you, Nikki, Kayvon, Courtney, and Chris for your facilitation and moderation of this panel. Thank you, each of you, and continue. Good luck with your business, Nikki and Chris. And thank you all so much. We're going to go ahead and start to gear up our next panel here, which is a super exciting one because it takes our conversation from the government to the bootstrapping. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about getting outside capital. This past panel was really focused on bootstrapping your business and non-dilutive capital. This next one is going to be about how do we go ahead and what are the opportunities for us to get capital from other places, other resources, and other opportunities. So with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to join us. And as they join us, we're going to go ahead and shortly here show a video. But before we show that video, I know that Jessica, who's going to be joining us, is going to have to bug off here a little bit earlier. So I'm going to start with conversations with her after the video, and then we'll go ahead and continue on with the rest of the panel and the conversation. I'm super excited about this panel because I think there's a lot of confusion. And just to bring up everybody up to speed here in the conversations that we've had this morning. This morning, we had the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Small Business Administration, and the Treasury Department talking about a variety of different programs and access to capital. And it's been a really fascinating conversation about a lot of the local programs. We learned a lot from them. And in this last panel, we talked a little bit about bootstrapping and the ability to grow a business without tapping into some of the other resources. In this panel that we're going to go ahead and dive into here, we're going to be talking a little bit about other resources and a bit more of traditional financing and capital, but also some of the newer versions and venture capital and also angel capital. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and just invite Amber to share the video, and then we'll start off with a conversation between Jessica and me, and then we'll launch into the panel in more detail. Amber?
Welcome to National Entrepreneurship Week. My name is Joe Catt.
And I'm Amber Ravenscroft.
5 years ago, we relaunched National Entrepreneurship Week, a congressionally chartered annual event to support and uplift America's new business startups. Originally founded in 2006, National Entrepreneurship Week takes place every year during the third week of February.
All across the United States, from Maui to Miami to Maine and everywhere in between, America's entrepreneurial ecosystem is vibrant and thriving. National Entrepreneurship Week celebrates the unmatched, innovative American spirit that has brought to life amazing products and services and includes a beautiful tapestry of diverse entrepreneurs.
During the week, you'll hear from a host of United States federal agencies as they share information on entrepreneurship and small business programs. You'll also hear from a nationwide network of partners, including entrepreneurial educators, ecosystem builders, and most importantly, entrepreneurs from all walks of life as they participate in the excitement of National Entrepreneurship Week.
Join in celebrating National Entrepreneurship Week by organizing an event in your local community, listening in on one of our national webinars, or participating in our annual social media campaign.
There has never been a better time to start a new business, and we challenge you to unleash your ideas into action during National Entrepreneurship Week.
National Entrepreneurship Week is made possible by contributions from an array of generous partners.
Views and opinions expressed in National Entrepreneurship Week programs are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of National Entrepreneurship Week, its agents, or any U.S. government agency. Any agency's participation or support is not an endorsement of any product, service, or entity. All liability with respect to any recommendations are hereby expressly disclaimed.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today, for all of those folks who are participating via the Zoom and also on Facebook, and also the significant amount of uptake that we get folks watching this after we go ahead and put the recording out there. So Jessica, I know that you're pressed for time, so we're going to go ahead and start with you. First of all, thank you for joining us, and also thank you for Goldman's sponsorship of this week in 10,000 small businesses. But before we jump into that, tell us a little bit, it's the same question I've been asking all of the folks. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, and also like why small. You can do a lot of things. Why small business? Why small business, and why entrepreneurship? Like, what is it about that has led you towards this career pathway?
No, I appreciate that, and so happy to be here. And this is a really important gathering, right? To kind of elevate the issues core to small businesses. So Joe, pleasure to be here today, and happy Friday, everyone.
Happy Funding Friday.
Happy Funding Friday. Love it. Love it. So, a little bit about me. I've now been with the 10,000 Small Businesses program for about 7.5 years. Prior to that, I had worked for the City of New York in the Department of Small Business Services under Mike Bloomberg when he was mayor. Did a lot of work helping small businesses get back online after Hurricane Sandy hit New York. And then before that, I had done, a lot of nonprofit work in the health and education sectors. And really for me, in terms of kind of why, small business, I was in the Peace Corps in Guatemala for 2 years and kind of had a really impactful experience there doing community health, and segued that into other nonprofit work in the US. And I kind of got to this point where, particularly in grad school, it crystallized for me anyway, that you can talk to communities about health, you can talk to communities about education, but bottom line, if they are not able to survive economically, right, those things end up becoming secondary. And so for me, kind of coming out of my grad program, I really wanted to find the nexus of, the econ piece, but tie that to a lot of the local place-based work I had been doing. And so for me, local economic development was that sweet spot. And then working with the City of New York allowed me to work with nonprofits across the city doing commercial revitalization work, which is really impactful, and now segueing to 10,000 small businesses. So for me, it's about, allowing people to make a living for themselves, right? So that they can then go off and be healthy and get educated and all the other things that, help to drive outcomes.
It's really interesting. Yesterday, we had Mother Teresa's secretary, who worked with Mother Teresa all around the world. And if you hear her story, it's absolutely amazing. She ran from rebels in Yemen. She rescued orphans in Beirut. She established one of the first AIDS hospices. And when she left the convent, she became a social entrepreneur. And actually, similar to you, she's now focusing on social entrepreneurship because and helping other communities start businesses. She's done in Africa and also in Haiti and in a number of different places. And we were chatting with her yesterday, and I was asking her this question about why have you chosen to live, she lives very simply, but also is very similar in terms of this idea that the core of community is really some of this economic development and small business, and the parallels between what you've just said and your own experience and her leaving the convent and going down this road, it's actually very, very similar. Over the course of this
that
week,
makes me feel good, Joe.
Yeah, no, listen, I mean, it's very, the parallels are real. And it's actually one of the reasons that I got into this as well. And the reason why we restarted National Entrepreneurship Week was to really focus and democratize entrepreneurship, because all of those other outcomes, transportation, healthcare, childcare, all of them are really dependent on, can people gain access to build a community wealth situation. And so it's really great. It's really interesting. I had the opportunity to have some exposure to the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses when I was working with a whole host of community colleges. And so in Philadelphia, I saw it in action. I was sat in the classroom and I heard the folks come together. And so before we talk about the actual, capital raising and those sorts of things, I just want to talk about that program itself and how that program has created a community around small businesses and entrepreneurs. Can you tell us a little bit more about that program? Because I have some things that I think I've learned across this week, in particular, that I think are tidbits that have just been great. Jessica.
Yeah. So 10,000 Small Businesses at its core is like a mini MBA, right? So we target existing businesses who have been in business at least 2 years, they have at least 2 employees, and they have at least 75K in revenues. And we say, okay, you've gotten over the hurdle of starting your business, you're properly generating revenues. Now, how do we help you take it to the next level? And actually, when you look at our alumni pool of over 12,400 businesses across the country, the median age of business is about 11 years, right? So these aren't folks who, are in that startup phase, but these are your kind of mom and pops, your community businesses who have been around and they're looking to really catalyze. And so that's where kind of 10,000 Small Businesses comes in. And we partnered with Babson College, over a decade ago, back in 2009, when we launched the program, to build a very practical, tangible curriculum that's modular, covers all the topics that are core to business growth, from kind of understanding your finances to operations to leadership to marketing, right? And the key deliverable is what we call a growth plan. So every business, in order to graduate from the program, you have to put pen to paper on a particular growth opportunity that you want to pursue and the key steps you're going to take to get there. So you come away with like a tangible plan for growth, which we hear from businesses is really crucial. And then they have that template, that framework that they can use over and over into the future, right, as they continue to grow their business. And so the community piece is really important, right? Because businesses take the program in groups of 30 to 40. We're industry agnostic. So a lot of businesses come in at the beginning to say, I felt really alone before 10,000 small businesses. And in that classroom, it allowed us to kind of break down the barriers, break down the silos. And I developed real trust, right, with my cohort members, where we're all really dealing with the same challenges around hiring, right, or around figuring out, how to get the capital we need to do something new and different in our business. And so what we've seen is that actually translates to actual B2B opportunities. So about 86% of our businesses end up doing business with each other when they graduate. That's like an extremely high number. And I think it's because they've gone through this common experience. They have a trust in each other, that everyone's just trying to grow their business, right? Everyone's relating. And that's actually, it's just a really powerful kind of effect of what we've created over the last decade. And we're taking kind of this intervention in the curriculum, and we're just deploying it over time, right? In groups of 30 to 40, right? Yeah. So we've been able to reach scale, but it's taken time, and it's taken that commitment.
Yeah, and I just want to say something. Earlier we had Martha Miller from the Office of Small Business Capital Formation over at the Securities and Exchange Commission. One of the things that she said is that the second biggest issue, and this is actually something I think is important for all of our panelists, the second biggest issue for most small businesses and entrepreneurs is this network effect, and the ability, because at the end of the day, we're in our business, right? Like, we're working in it. We are going ahead and trying to fulfill orders. We're dealing with vendors. We're dealing with suppliers. We're dealing with customers. We're dealing with pandemics. Things are changing on the fly, right? And so we're in this situation where we're immersed in our business. And one of the things we heard from an entrepreneur yesterday who went through the program, and he said, the program is like drinking from a fire hose. And I said to him, well, what do you mean by that? He said, it's absolutely great. It took me out of my business and gave me the opportunity to really spend some time thinking about what my business is, what it means to me, but also the growth plan, but also thinking about an exit strategy, which is another piece that I think a lot of small businesses, I've worked with a lot of small businesses and I've had the opportunity, a lot of small business owners don't necessarily think about that. And that's one of the biggest benefits, I think, that I've been hearing over the course of the week of the program itself. Anything you want to add to that? And then I want to jump into some of the funding pieces, and then we'll go ahead and move on.
Yeah, no, I mean, nothing really to add. I think you're absolutely right. What businesses take on is tremendous. What the business owners take on, especially at the last 2 years during the pandemic. So yeah, maybe we get into some of that.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, let's switch gears for a little bit and talk a little bit about funding and some of the biggest issues, as it relates to growing businesses. And in my experience, some small businesses are not really equipped to handle that infusion. We talked earlier about having your proverbial house in order. Talk a little bit about, from a funding perspective, and maybe even as a part of the program, how the aspects, how does 10,000 Small Business Program help entrepreneurs prepare themselves for funding or even increase potential funding opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think, two things that I hear from our alums, right, is that I now have a better understanding of what my growth path is because of 10,000 small businesses. And because of that, I have a better understanding of my actual financial need in order to kind of pursue that growth path, right? So it's more crystallized. So it's not necessarily that they didn't, understand their financials and all of that before, although for sure, the program really helps folks kind of get a better sense of that. But it's that now when I go to kind of make that capital ask, I can very specifically say exactly what that money is going to. And then because I kind of looked at my financials in the curriculum in the context of this growth opportunity, I can then clearly explain the returns and how I'm going to pay the money back in the case of a loan, right? Yeah. And so it kind of demystifies that for business owners in terms of kind of making that capital ask. we actually do later in the curriculum what we call kind of rocket pitches, which is like a friendlier version of Shark Tank, where the businesses give mock pitches as if they're seeking capital, and we invite Goldman Sachs employees and community partners in to give feedback. And so it's a way for businesses to hone in on that pitch, right? And so we don't shy away from the fact that, you know, you need capital to grow and scale. It's about understanding specifically where that capital is going to grow, where that capital is going to go, excuse me, and how you're going to pay that loan back. And then the other thing is we really try to connect our businesses and help them build relationships with capital providers, right? And so a lot of alums will say there's no better time than to kind of speak to a banker than when you actually, no worse time to speak to a banker than when you actually need capital, right? It's like you actually need to be building that relationship well in advance of an actual ask so that folks are familiar with you, your business, et cetera. And so we have what we call a lenders panel, where we bring in kind of local lenders in our markets where 10 KSB exists across the country, and they connect with the businesses, right? And so we really see that as kind of the genesis of, you know, what we hope to be down the road, actual money out the door to these small businesses.
Yeah, and it's just so incredibly important. As somebody who ran a financial planning business and worked with a lot of small business owners over the years, and understanding, you know, how small business, because what happens is, and I think one of the benefits of the program is that I said this before, the business owners are so entrenched and sort of working in their business that the opportunity to take a step back and say, okay, what is my actual growth here? And I know that Eli is gonna touch on this probably in a little bit more as part of his being on the board of the Angel Capital Association. But I think that when you look at the types of funding and getting folks prepared to be able to do that, if folks are interested in the program, how can they learn more about participating? Because there are a lot of small businesses who've been listening throughout the course of this week, and that you know, maybe fit the mold for the type of businesses that can participate. What any thoughts on best ways for them to get in touch about the program?
It's super easy. Folks can go to 10ksbapply.com. And there they can also learn more about the program and apply. It's a 10-minute online application for part one. And, you know, we're basically constantly accepting applications, you know, across our brick and mortar locations. We have partnerships with community colleges in various major cities across the country. And then for those folks who fall outside of those kind of, you know, boundaries, we have what we call the national cohort, where folks can take the program both online and in person. And that in-person component is actually at Goldman Sachs headquarters. So we have an all expense paid trip for about 150 businesses, or 300 businesses a year, 150 per cohort, to come to Goldman. They spend, you know, 3 to 4 days finishing up the coursework, graduating, connecting with Goldman Sachs executives, et cetera. So that's the best way to get to us, 10ksbapply.com.
Well, and we had some great entrepreneurs, and one of the entrepreneurs that was through the program said this yesterday, that your network allows you at some point not to work, and so that having this sort of network, I thought it was Joni I think had said that yesterday, and I think it's a really, really good example. Well, I want to be cognizant of our time. It's gone by really, really quickly. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I would just share to small businesses, you know, what you've had to navigate over the last 2 years, especially, is unprecedented. And so, you know, if you're here now and your business is still operating, even if you feel like it's not where you want it to be, like, you should just take a moment to just pat yourself on the back. And then, you know, we have folks like Goldman through 10KSB and other resources here, and we're just here to kind of continue to nourish you and fuel you forward, because you're absolutely essential to this country's economy.
And I would just add on to that, because I tell people this all the time, the best time to start a business is in the worst of times, because what happens is if you can operate a business in the worst of times, it only gets better from there if you can go ahead and figure out your business model. You know, we absolutely appreciate it. Jessica, thank you for joining us, and thank you for the opportunity for us to co-create and collaborate with you and Goldman Sachs and the 10,000 small business programs. Hopefully we can have you back again at some point soon, and we can dive into a lot of these things in much more detail.
I would love that. And thanks so much, Joe, for having me, and happy Friday again to everyone.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
I want to switch gears now and turn it over to our other panelists and just say thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it. Eli, I want to start with you because you heard what we just said and you have an amazing background. Why don't we do this? Why don't we just go around and give everybody the opportunity to introduce themselves, and then Eli, I'll come back to you for some questions. But let's first start with an introduction for yourself. Eli, please.
Well, Joe, it's good to be here, and it's good to be here with these fellow panelists and old colleagues that I see online as well. So I'm Eli Velasquez. I am, as Joe said, I am on the board of the Angel Capital Association. We'll talk more about what that organization is. I'm also co-founder and managing partner of Investors of Color. That's a national network of Black, Latinx, Asian, and ally accredited investors, all seeking to close the racial funding gap. My experience spans from everything from tech transfer to angel networks, venture, it goes on, but I have seen the startup space from multiple angles. And so, seeing the struggles of different companies trying to raise capital. So whatever perspectives I can bring to that, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to dive into this because we also know that, there's been a lot of challenges for, a number of different marginalized communities and folks like that. So, yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Johnny, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, take yourself off of mute, and please share your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So Johnny Price here. I lead the fundraising team at WeFunder. We're a platform that lets startup founders raise capital from their customers and community, as well as accredited investors and VCs. I've been here for 4 years. Before this, I founded the US team at a nonprofit called Kiva.org. So we were also doing crowdfunding capital of microloans for small businesses, micro businesses. So I've been in the crowdfunding space for a while now. I'm originally from the UK, now live here in Nashville.
Okay, I thought that was a Nashville accent that I was hearing. So thank you for clarifying that. Max, why don't you go ahead? Please introduce yourself. Great background. Tell us, introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Max. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Caribou. As you can see, we bring families together in virtual play dates. So you can read, draw, play games with a loved one, especially 0 to 12. No matter the distance. And we've raised over $5 million. I'm a Latinx founder, and I'm the first Latinx founder, male or female, to actually raise the $1 million equity crowdfunding cap, which was the cap before it was raised to $5 million. And because of the fact that women and people of color tend to raise less in venture capital, I'm a big proponent of equity crowdfunding as an alternative source of capital. So I love coming out, especially with Johnny, to talk about equity crowdfunding as a real resource for small entrepreneurs or small businesses and entrepreneurs, especially women and people of color.
Well, fantastic. We're super excited and I can't wait to hear more about your story. So Deepak, please share with us your background and welcome.
Thanks, Joe. So my background is I was, before I started my company called Neofluidics, we're more of a deep tech company. I have a PhD. I was a grad student at Texas Tech University, so I have a PhD in chemical engineering. And part of the company which was started was from my PhD thesis. We moved pretty early out of Lubbock, Texas. And I think we'll go into the reasons in a bit. We've raised quite a lot of money to kind of get, as most deep tech startups do. And most recently, we were actually acquired. So now I'm in the Bay Area. I've moved to the Bay Area. So that's kind of a little background about myself.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's great actually to have all of you here because a lot of the folks that I have come in contact with over the years, thousands of entrepreneurs, the goal of this panel is to really demystify. It's actually one of the longest panels that we have during the course of the week to really demystify the conversations about access to capital. So Eli, I want to start with you as the founder of Investors of Color, but you're also on the board of the Angel Capital Association. So let's go ahead and just from a very basic perspective, all right? Y'all are a lot smarter than I am. I don't know anything about this stuff. Walk me through, what are we talking about here as it relates? What is angel capital? What is venture capital? What is crowdfunding? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so I love that question because it can be very confusing, right? When you're sitting out there talking and trying to figure out where you can get capital. So I'll start with the angel side first. Angels are everyday individuals that happen to have money at their disposal to be able to make investments in small businesses, create startups, things of that nature. People say Shark Tank, but I don't really like that association that much because it gets a little bit overhyped. Angels are individuals that are accredited investors. And by that, I mean that the SEC has dictated that they have to meet a certain income threshold every year, 200,000 as an individual, 300,000 with a partner, or $1 million of net worth, not including their house, or a certified, a FINRA license, FINRA 765 or 82. So they're licensed in some financial way to make investments. We're talking to the SEC about what that definition can look like and maybe should look like to enable more people of color to participate. But I'd like to say is that angel investors are individuals and they will write checks out of their own personal wealth into your company. And you come to some agreement with that individual on a portion of equity that you're going to give, a stake of ownership in your company to that individual or group of individuals. And they can be set up as a person or groups, right? And what I represent within the Angel Capital Association is a set of organizations like angel groups. So 275 plus angel groups in the association, but we believe that there's over 450 of them that exist in the US. In our membership, there's about 14,000 members, but according to our data, there's about 300,000 individuals in the US that qualify as accredited investors. So there are individuals out there that are angels or qualify to be angels, but don't even know that they're angels or have never gotten into that space. And so these individuals write money from their own personal checks. That means they're going to dip it out of their savings or their personal wealth or whatnot to make that investment in your company. Venture capital, on the other hand, is a legal entity comprised of managers within that organization who go out and raise capital from professional organizations like pension funds, foundations, endowments, and other high net worth individuals. And they then manage that money to make investments into different companies. So many times those operators of those funds will also put some of their own money, but it all gets pooled into a legal structure, which is a venture fund, right? And so there's also a National Venture Capital Association that has a listing of the different venture groups that are out there that enable you to get capital. And then crowdfunding, which I'm not going to dive into because we have the experts here, is an ability for folks to get money from both accredited and non-accredited investors on platforms where people post what they're looking for, and then they can use the power of the crowd to go out and raise money. So that's at a high level. That's who we are. That's who we represent. And then there's angel groups forming all the time, and there's angel investors walking right by you in the grocery stores and in the business meetings. And so that can be kind of the confusing part and the challenging part of how you go out and start finding these angel investors.
Well, and I think there's also a number of different aspects that may be barriers or obstacles to folks, not just the language. And so Max, I want to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about your journey and that experience about how you went about it and share sort of some of the wisdom for the folks who are listening about how that journey's come along for you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad Eli gave a really good foundational kind of explanation of who everybody is, because I think the first mistake I made was going after the wrong investors at the wrong time. And I think that's one of the first things that entrepreneurs do, is because we just don't know, right? We don't know the difference between an angel. We don't understand a VC or private equity investor and which one you should talk to and what their check sizes are. So in the beginning stages, you're probably talking to, well, first of all, friends and family, friends, family, and fools, some people call them. And unfortunately for some communities, we don't have friends that can just drop $10,000 into our business. And if you're not taking a $10,000 check, then you're building a cap table, right? A cap table of ownership of people with $500, friends and family checks. That can get very cumbersome and can actually hurt you in raising later. So, I'm from Miami. My parents are Cuban immigrants. Like, I don't have friends with $10,000. And so we went after angels first and I went to a fancy business school. I thought literally I'm just going to go ask people for money and they're going to throw checks at my head because like I'm adorable and look at my product, it's amazing. And
right. Who doesn't want to invest in that, right?
Come on, it's gonna be so easy. It's not that easy, especially if you're a woman. You're underestimated. You walk into the meeting and there's a million different intrinsic biases that are coming at you. The way that people ask questions to women is actually documented in research that it is different. It is very preventative versus promotional. So, you're kind of running against this uphill battle. And we ended up raising actually $1.3 million in kind of angel and family offices and VCs. Before we actually went to equity crowdfunding. But the reason we went to equity crowdfunding is because, through this process of getting these investors in our second round of funding, so after the 1.3 million, we went for more funding and ended up with a very predatory term sheet. And a predatory term sheet for anyone.
Yes, please explain that.
Yeah, it just means that the investor is kind of betting against you. It means that they've put so many legal or financial terms in the term sheet where you will be hurt if you don't meet those criteria. And, we got this term sheet and I was just like, why does someone think that they can even give this to me? Like, why is this even, like, are my
it's almost offensive, right? It's almost offensive.
So offensive. And so I'm like this, Latina where I'm just like, don't try me. So I was like, what are my other options? Because I never liked to have my back against the wall. And I found out about equity crowdfunding. And it was 2019. So it was still very early days of equity crowdfunding. A lot of investors kind of had, the little, like, I don't have I don't like equity crowdfunding. And there are some valid reasons for why they didn't like it. I will say the biggest reason they didn't like it is because it was a threat to their, their model. And one of the things that we had done, so before, when I went out to go raise funding and no one wanted to give it to me, I did pitch competitions. And we won or were the finalists in over 30 pitch competitions. We did extremely well. But one of the things that I was doing while I was doing pitch competitions is I was building my crowd. I was at every pitch competition, connecting on LinkedIn with all the judges, with everyone in the audience. I mean, the product that I have, literally everyone in the audience either needed it or knew someone. So I was building this crowd. And so, Johnny specifically, when I got to, kind of this choice where I was like, do I take this guy's money or do I try and find an alternative? I actually was very in a privileged position. Not everyone has this. And that's what I always tell founders is equity crowdfunding is not the easier route to funding. It's just an alternative route. And honestly, if you're a company that doesn't have a big crowd, the platforms will not bring that crowd to you. You have to bring the crowd. And so I was in this very fortunate position where I had been building a crowd for 2 years. And so as soon as we launched our campaign, it was great. And then it went gangbusters. We raised $1 million in 2 months, almost 2 million in 3 months, which is like unheard of. We ended up raising more than we needed. And we've raised since then, right? I think that was the other thing that a lot of people believed about equity crowdfunding, which was wrong, was like, oh, if you do equity crowdfunding, no investor will touch you. We raised more money after that. So I think one of the things I will say to everybody is equity crowdfunding is a real option if you have a crowd. It's also a real option if you have the time to do the campaign. It's, again, not an easier way to raise money, just an alternative.
Well, and it's really interesting because what you've just hit on is a theme that we've heard on all week is the importance of network, right? Your network is your net worth. And, if you're going to be a business owner, I don't care what business you're in, whether you're, you want to become a mechanic, HVAC person, you have to build out your customers. You have to build out your network. And I would say that's probably one of the most important skills. You can have the best product, but if you can't communicate and you don't have anybody to communicate that with, then you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to be sitting home with a bunch of product. And that's not anything that anybody wants. And so what you've just hit on is the importance of networking as a business owner. And how do you go ahead and utilize that? Johnny, I want to throw it over to you for a second and just kind of, you've had a lot of experience in this area. How do people get started in this? And what are some thoughts that you have with regards to the way that this works? Please share some more information.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Max was saying, I think it's a good option. For me, there's kind of two use cases for founders that want to use this new SEC exemption called regulation crowdfunding to raise capital from unaccredited investors as well as accredited investors. And about 50% of investment volume on WeFunder is actually from accredited investors. So I definitely see it as both, right? It's not an either or thing. Sometimes founders are raising capital from VCs either before or after the WeFunder round, or even in parallel in a Regulation D round in parallel. So it's not an either or thing. But yeah, the two use cases for me, for founders are firstly, if you need a bit of help raising capital, right? So maybe you're kind of pitching angel groups, you're pitching institutional investors, you're kind of struggling to build up momentum on the round. Oftentimes, right, investors are kind of circling around waiting to see who else is going to invest, and there can be this inertia that sets in. And so if you kind of need some help in breaking that inertia, then I think being able to go to your customers and get them to invest in you, being able to post on LinkedIn to all of your connections that you've worked with down the years and get them to invest in you, go to your friends and family in a legally compliant way. You can now talk about the investment opportunity on Facebook, or put out a press release, or just keep emailing and texting people and meeting people, and then lowering the barrier to entry so that rather than an angel having to write a 10K minimum check, now they can come in for $500. So you can start to break the inertia and build momentum on a round. And so a big part of our mission, we're a B Corp, but WeFunder are a public benefit corporation. A big part of our mission is to try to expand access to capital for founders who might be otherwise struggling, right? And Max was talking about, yeah, as a female founder, as a founder of color, you know, as someone outside of Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston. Max obviously checked all three of those boxes. You know, I'm here in Nashville and hearing that you can't get in front of angel investors here until you have $1 million of annual recurring revenue, right? Which is coming from Silicon Valley. Like, I was 10 years in San Francisco. That's just crazy. So anyway, we want to make it easier for founders to raise capital. That's the first kind of value proposition we have for entrepreneurs. And then the second, and we're seeing this kind of come more and more now, which is really, really exciting for us, is a founder that doesn't need help raising capital. A founder that can easily raise capital from VCs or angels, but they get really excited about bringing in their customers and community to be owners of their company, because they think that will turn their customers into more loyal customers. Their churn will go down, their net promoter score will go up, they'll be more passionate ambassadors for that brand. And so a really good example recently, this company Mercury Bank, they raised 120 million Series B round from Andreessen Horowitz, which is pretty widely regarded as one of the best venture capital firms in the world. Just raised 120 million, didn't need the money, but then opened up a $5 million allocation to their customers. We call it a community round. Basically just because they wanted their customers to be owners of them. And their founder, Imad, has talked about those 2,500 investors in their WeFunder campaign as being his favorite lines on their cap table. It's actually one line on the cap table, but the favorite investors in the company. And so those for me are the two reasons why a founder would do WeFunder, right? Firstly, kind of easier way to raise capital, or maybe if you're struggling, we can kind of get you to your goal. And then secondly, bring on your customers and community as owners. You can raise $50K to $5 million on WeFunder, and obviously you can go to the website and learn more if you want to.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a great point, and I hadn't really considered that in the past. So for all you entrepreneurs out there, think about that for a second. That your customers and your clients, they actually become investors and evangelists of your own business, and really help to sell that, versus, oh, okay, I'm just going to buy a product and then I'll move on. What you're doing and what you're saying is that a part of the sales process, part of your ability to grow your business, is going to be about about this. Deepak, I want to go ahead and just chat with you for a second and have you share a little bit more about your experience. And then Max, I'm going to come back over to you because I want to learn and have you share with us a little bit more about the actual expansion of your network first. But Deepak, please share with us a little bit more about your journey.
Sure, Joe. So as I said, my company, Neofluidics, we're in the deep tech space, particularly in drug discovery. As you can probably imagine, we need a lot of capital in the beginning, even before a product is defined. A lot of this tech which comes out of the university, you don't really have a product market fit yet. but you do know that if it does work, there are so many areas that it could probably apply to. The problem there, though, is there is a lot of engineering and scientific risk. What I went through in the beginning was having, especially in a place like Lubbock, which is West Texas, you don't have a very, very strong angel network, or you don't have any VCs there. It's very difficult to raise capital, especially in a startup like this, where there's no sales, there's probably no projected sales for the next 5 years. You don't have a clear product roadmap. And all you have is an idea and technology in the lab bench format, right? And I think, as Johnny was saying, or Max was saying, is that a lot of investors, the traditional angel investors, if you like, they like to see an annual return. They like to see in 2 years, okay, what milestones are you going to hit in terms of sales? But that just doesn't exist for a company like mine with what we do. So I think the first move, that's one of the reasons I kind of moved out of there and came to closer to the Bay Area, San Diego. I was also particularly lucky to have met people like Eli, who kind of created this ecosystem for sophisticated angel investors, who kind of understood that companies, like ours, we're not going to have these clear ARR patterns and these very sophisticated business models where I can guarantee you or I can at least make a promise in 3 years that you're going to get this amount of revenue or sales. And they understand that the exit for most companies like us is either being acquired for the tech piece, or if you're very lucky, going on to an IPO. It was. I would say I was lucky in one instance that I did get some sophisticated angel investors, and we raised more than $5 or $6 million in the beginning just to have some semblance of a product. And we had a few early customers, and then the pandemic hit, of course, and that was kind of hard on us, especially in a company like ours where you're really relying on labs to be open and people physically coming in and doing experiments. Because if that doesn't happen, nothing happens. You don't sell your product, right? Yeah. And so it was difficult, but then I think we did survive. And then, as I said, most companies like in our space, we had a bigger competitor who came in and kind of acquired our technology and is taking it to the next level. But I think one thing I do want to mention, and I think we're slowly getting there. Places like Austin is now kind of coming on the map. You have great universities in smaller towns, not just in the Bay Area, on the Boston, Cambridge area, and I think that creating that ecosystem is extremely important because there's a lot of great technology there and a lot of great ideas, especially in the deep tech space. Really, I think my advice to entrepreneurs in this space would be the easiest form of capital would be to go to, angel investors who are a little more sophisticated and try to kind of explain to them in more of a lay person kind of language, which is kind of tough for scientists to do. But I think that's extremely important. The storytelling aspect of it is extremely important to kind of show the vision of the grand future of whatever vision you have. And I think that's kind of my experience from my journey.
You actually bring up a really good point, and I don't care what kind of entrepreneur you are. At the end of the day, and I've talked about this all week, is that you have to be a salesperson. And people are like, "Oh, sales! I'm not a salesperson." Look, we sell every day, right? If you have a husband, a wife, a spouse, or friends, and you want to go to dinner, you want to do something, you got to sell them on where you're going to dinner, right? We're all salespeople. We have to go ahead in order to be able to survive. We don't necessarily call it sales, right? And so that whole notion of sales is actually really important, and we have to learn that. I've worked with a lot of academics and a lot of engineers, and I know that some of the scientists and the challenges, but really putting on this mindset of that, actually, I am kind of a salesperson, right? I got to go ahead and if I'm going to find a spouse, I got to sell myself to somebody, right? So let's start at a very basic level. But that piece of selling our businesses is super important. And Max, I want to come back to you, because this idea of selling your business, right, in terms of not selling it to sell it to somebody, but to get folks excited about it. Because you had to do a couple of different things, right? You had to sell it to people and to parents, and to say, look, this is, and then you also had to sell it to potential investors. Walk us through that networking creation, because it sounds like you've done an amazing job of building this networking. I want you to go ahead for all those people, because on the last call, on the call that we had with the Securities and Exchange Commission, SBA, somebody said, well, I don't have, I'm not an entrepreneur that has a network. I'm like, and I said, that your job is to go ahead and build it. Walk us through your journey on that piece.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about sales. And I think sales has like a negative connotation to it, right? And people, don't want to be called salespeople, but at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. Every day I am selling the business, whether it's to hire new people, to sell it to my customers, to talk to investors, to talk to community partners, strategic partners, right? Like, my job is to be a storyteller. My job is to relay what we do. And that's actually one of the things with equity crowdfunding. And I know Johnny will say that there's a lot of B2B businesses do equity crowdfunding and do fine, but I found that for a B2C business, right? So a business to consumer, I sell to consumers. It was a lot easier for me to do a community round, because I was used to talking to individual customers all the time, right? And that's why I say that, kind of this equity crowdfunding versus, kind of a more traditional investor round, they're just as hard as each other. They take just as long, just as much time. They're just very different ways of raising capital. I would say the investor side is more B2B, right? You are asking a lot of people, but you're then getting like a small number of people to give you a bigger check. And then with crowdfunding, you're asking a lot of people and you're expecting a lot more people to give you smaller checks, right? So you're making it up on volume. And when it comes to building your network, and this is also a very gendered thing, right? There's a lot of women stereotypically who are like, well, I don't like to network. I feel like that's very transactional. Like, I want to build relationships. And unfortunately, especially as women, we need to see relationship building in a different way, and see that relationship building a lot of times is community building. And it doesn't have to be transactional, and it doesn't have to be, oh, I'm only talking to this person because I need something, they need something. It's building your community so we can be helpful to each other through the long term, right? It doesn't have to be a short-term transactional thing. And I think that's what was so great about my network, is that it was a network of people that I had built in my career, in education and in government, and people who knew me as someone who was going to build something that was in this space. It was building a network here. So as Johnny said, I'm in Miami, right? I was building Miami Tech before the mayor tweeted about it. Born and raised here.
Me too, by the way. Me too. North Miami Beach, born and raised. Yo puedo hablar cubano, okay?
Yeah, that's all. Okay. So, funny story, I'm in North Miami Beach. So I think like the community building that I was doing here as like a Miami born and bred founder, that was a big reason why we did this round, was because a lot of people in Miami were like, we love what you're doing. We want to root for you. We want to invest in you, but I can't afford a $10,000 check. And so, you also take for granted sometimes the community you're building in your co-working space, at the local coffee shop that you go to, like anyone that knows what you're building and wants to support you in some way. And then there's the community of, as Johnny said, there's also accredited investors who are doing equity crowdfunding, right? Like, you're still building those relationships with these investors who may want to come in as a VC in this round as a smaller check, or an individual at that investment fund that wants to come in. Maybe the VC fund isn't going to come in, but this individual wants to come in, right? It just gave people the ability to kind of support Caribou in whichever way they felt like they could. And honestly, like I see community building as, if you are not building a community, and that's not customers, that's not investors, that's literally a community around your business, I don't know how you're going to do it. It's so hard. Without just kind of people rooting you on and making connections and introducing you and giving you free working space. Like, I mean, you need that, to survive. So
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons that Amber and I, restarted National Entrepreneurship Week, was really to focus on how do we democratize this stuff, right? Because if you're a woman or a BIPOC, or how you create, and there's cultural aspects, right? My husband, he's Colombian, and when he started in law school, he went to like one of the first lunches at a law firm, and there were all these, he didn't have exposure to, like, I don't even know which fork to pick up, right? And so if we're dealing with some of those barriers as we talk about entrepreneurship, and we talk about access to capital, you can have the best idea, but historically, if you haven't fit in those molds, which is why I love this conversation today, right? Because we're really honing in on, there's a number of different aspects that people need to be mindful of and cognizant of, not just on building your business side of things, but on funders and the important work that Eli's doing in being able to raise the awareness of, hey, there's a lot of really good business ideas here, and we're really missing the boat on some of these things. I want to just take a second and just, for anybody who's listening who may have questions, I know that Max, you're going to have to bug out of here in just a little bit, and I want to make sure that people who are listening, if you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A. I got to tell you, this is just a powerful panel for all of the folks, and really is a great way to cap off this week. Eli, I want you to go ahead and just share with us a little bit more about your own personal journey into this space. Like, if you don't mind sharing, how did you get into this space and see this gap from your own personal perspective?
Kicking and clawing, Joe, kicking and clawing. I shared this story because I shared it with the SEC last week. And my investor journey is funky because, at a certain level, I described the requirements for you to get into the space. So I got a mechanical engineering degree, and went and did rocket science for the Boeing company. Got a law degree while I was there, and did IP work. Went back to my hometown of El Paso.
Intellectual property work, just for the folks. IP's intellectual property work.
Yep. Yeah. Intellectual property. Go back to my hometown. Start managing an angel network. Build a binational tech incubator. But I can't participate because the pay that I was making with my previous role would have gotten me into the accredited levels. But in going back to my hometown to support my community, I ended up working for a nonprofit, which slashed my pay, which now I can't really get there. I can't rely on net income or my net worth, because I was just barely building, and my parents are not going to pass that on. They're not going to pass any sort of net worth at that level, right? So here I am working these deals, not able to participate, but everybody else around me that looks nothing like me is able to participate. I then go on and start an organization to vet deals for a $200 million fund in Texas, but I still can't participate. I go on to fund an angel network where I bumped into Deepak, but I can't invest in his company, right? And so here's an example of me looking at these opportunities go fly by time after time. And when I look at the time scale, it only took lots of hard negotiations with employers, and ensuring that I'm gonna meet those levels, and then surrounding myself with good mentors, and to Max's point, building my network of other angel investors. And so much so that now it's building these groups where we started to learn. So in one part, there's 20 years of lost investment opportunities for me, right? I think back to the exits that I could have invested in, including Neofluidics potentially, right? What would that have done for my kids? What would that have done for generational wealth if the opportunities were afforded to me 20 years ago, to enable for me to participate from a different sophistication level versus just, hey, if you make this amount, you're good, you're in the club, but if you don't, you're out. Yeah. Right. And that carries so many implications, because if you live in Kansas City and you're working at a law firm, you make $175,000, you can't get in. You put that same attorney in San Francisco making $250 and they're in. Who's the more sophisticated investor? We don't know, and money's not going to be the dictator of that, right? So these are some of the challenges that we're trying to address, and these are some of the things that are important for small businesses, because for angels, as we get more people that haven't traditionally been in this space, they understand what it means to invest in small business, right? They understand what it means to invest locally. They understand what the network effects are, and to build other communities of investors that look like you and think like you. So what we're trying to do is really change the model of what angel investors are like, so that it's not, when you think of it, it's the Ivy League country club yacht traveling individual. It's somebody that looks like me and Max and Johnny and Deepak. And
or
you,
they
Joe.
aren't look like you, but because of your own experience and background, you recognize that as an opportunity, right? They're not necessarily a part of your community, but they're not part of the other community as well. That's, you know, what you just mentioned. Well, Max, I know you have to jump off of here in just a second, but I would love for you to share some words of wisdom to anybody who's listening. Just last parting comments, and then I'm going to come back to Johnny and to Deepak again. But words of wisdom. I mean, you Apple's best apps of 2020, Time Magazine best inventions. Yesterday, I was talking to Kara Golden, who started a Hint water company, the Water Hint, and she was talking a similar journey about the challenges and the opportunities, both as a female entrepreneur and you know, now and doing almost the impossible of taking. She's selling water, right? Like flavored water in the beverage, you know, competing against Pepsi and Coca-Cola, right? And she had some amazing words of wisdom. What words of wisdom, anybody who's listening, what would you impart in terms of their entrepreneurial journey? What would you share with them?
Yeah. So look, we're not going to change the fact that there's a lot of bias in the system and that traditional funding routes, and that's banks as well, right? And VC and a lot of other traditional systems were not built by people that look like me, that are women or BIPOC, and they weren't built for people like me. And so we could sit here and complain and talk about, you know, how awful it is, or we could find ways to create our own pathways, our own systems, our own networks. And that's why I'm on a tear always to talk about these community rounds, equity crowdfunding, alternative sources of capital that people can access. Because what I find is that I see a lot of women and people of color building really phenomenal businesses for their communities. A lot of women and people of color, against big stereotype or generalization, but we tend to build because we actually run into a problem, and it's usually a pretty big problem that we're trying to solve. And then we build this solution. We can't find funding. You know, we're bootstrapping for as long as we possibly can, and then this solution never comes to the masses and to the market. And who loses out? Our communities. So I get very frustrated when I see really great ideas being built by really phenomenal founders that just can't get the you know, fuel. And so I always talk about alternative sources of funding. The other piece of advice that I will always leave, especially women founders, if you are going into a financing process, unfortunately, and like I said, the research shows that we tend to get preventive questions versus promotional questions. So my big piece of advice is, you know, women, people of color, know that there are biases out there and just understand how to turn them into an advantage. So one of the things that I do, and the research is out there, literally look up prevention versus promotion questions, and you'll find the research around this. But one of the things that I do is when I hear a prevention question, when I hear someone asking me something where they're trying to assess risk, they're trying to find a way like why not to invest in me, like my numbers are too small or my growth is too slow or whatever, I always answer with a promotional answer. So again, there's not much I can do about people's biases and the underestimation that they have of people that don't look like them. I can't solve that. But what I can do is I can realize what's happening, and I can make sure that when I respond, when I present my information, that it's done in a promotional way so that I still get to the end game that everyone else gets to get to. So
yeah. Well, thank you so much. You know, I'm writing a book on some stuff, and one of the things that I came across was that entrepreneurs give back to community, give back in terms of philanthropy in greater ways. And so hopefully your success will continue, and you can actually then turn around and begin to make investments in other businesses that you're able to see the vision with and be able to create, you know, some of the other aspects of things. So I just want to thank you so much, Max, for joining us. We're going to continue the conversation, but good luck. We're going to keep an eye on you. And next time I'm in Miami, I'm gonna come over. We're going to have a little cafe cubano together, juntos.
Oh, perfecto. Thanks,
All
everyone.
right. Thank you. Have a good weekend. Johnny, fill in some gaps here. I mean, great conversation. Really, really fantastic conversation. What are your thoughts on these pieces? Because you were at kiva.org, and I had some familiarity with that. You know, based on some folks who've reached out and stuff like that. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so for me, there's kind of there's many different capital options, right? So at Kiva, we were doing microloans, crowdfunded microloans. So the average loan was just $5,000, right? So for a barbershop in inner city Detroit or a farm in rural Arkansas, $5,000, $10,000 was often quite useful, and it was zero interest, no fees. Coming from people lending in $25 increments, really motivated by philanthropy, and it was for the mom and pop shop, the micro business that was kind of just starting out, right? And then now what we funded, the average company raises $500,000, right? And so it tends to be more kind of startups that are on that, have those kind of big growth ambitions, and where investors can, hope to make a financial return. We actually do debt as well as equity. But for me, yeah, it's kind of trying to match the right capital to the right entrepreneur. I always say there's kind of three things that determine success for a company considering doing a community round and raising capital from their customers and community. The first is it a good investment, right? So if you'd go and pitch Eli and angels, and they would kind of laugh you out of the room because there's no growth, and the team doesn't really have what it takes, or the product needs more kind of traction, or whatever it is, whatever any investor would look at, or you're valuing a business at $100 million when it should be valued at $2 million. There's many things that kind of sophisticated investors would look at it and kind of raise their eyebrows at. Whereas if you have a really awesome investment, then you're going to do well on WeFunder, right? So the second is the audience size. So Max spoke to this, and certainly, yeah, the larger the audience, the more that audience loves you and what you're doing, I think the more conducive it is to run a community round. And then thirdly would be the hustle. So again, Max talked about this, but she did an incredible job, working really hard, sending every email, reaching out to every journalist, taking every meeting opportunity, and just really hustling. So for me, that's kind of a framework that I think is helpful for founders as they consider, maybe exploring raising money from their community, their audience, as well as WeFunder's network as well. That's kind of how I think about what determines success.
Well, Johnny, I think that's really good advice. And that network piece is so important. Deepak, talk a little bit more about that journey that you've been on, because it's really fascinating to hear that. And then actually, I'm going to come back to you, Eli, to sort of close us out on this panel. But from your perspective, Deepak, that journey, particularly what I want you to do here for a second is speak to the scientists and the engineers and the very technical people. Speak to Eli, our resident rocket scientist here, right? He's a guy, he's in this, he's working on some technology, he's working in, CRISPR or some of the new and emerging technologies, AR, VR, metaverse. What advice do you have for them who are really focused on the nuances of the technical aspects and not really focused on this piece, but they want to go ahead and be able to commercialize that technology? What advice would you have for them?
I think my biggest advice would be that, as an engineer or a scientist, you spend quite a lot of time on the technical side, and what a big technical leap is, right? But that doesn't really mean anybody else does, right? And so a very critical aspect of that is, as I said, is storytelling. And a lot of the other panelists actually came to storytelling, and then, of course, hustling, right? You need to be able to explain to your audience what that really means. Quantum computing, for example, right? And I mean, not a lot of people understand what a technical leap in quantum computing would make it a reality. You might, but a lot of people wouldn't, right? And the storytelling is the most important piece. Is for you to explain what that would do to that industry 20 years from now, maybe, and how that would make or fill a gap and make things much more efficient, and then relate that in terms of monetary aspects. Because in the end, as you said, we're all trying to sell, right? And when you start a business, the end point is you're trying to get customers, you're trying to sell, or you're trying to exit, right? And I think that piece for me as a scientist was kind of difficult to do in the beginning. And it took a lot of effort on my part to kind of get to that place where I was able to actually break down the story into its basics and then relate it to something an investor or an angel investor who has no idea. Because trust me, I don't think you'd find many angel investors in this space or the particular space you're working in, especially if you're in deep tech. But relating that to an endpoint and to what one is, of course, the change that it would make to people as a whole and the difference it would make to their lives, but also in terms of the monetary aspects of what would happen, what gap it fills, and what that means in terms of your EBITDA multiples, for example, right? Yeah. Things like that. I think that that is an important aspect, so that was something which was kind of hard to learn as a scientist, but I think once you do that, I think the whole world opens up to you.
This is my recommendation to scientists and technical people, engineers everywhere. If you have a concept, figure out your concept, then go to a 10-year-old kid and an 80-year-old grandmother and explain it to them, and then have them ask you questions. Because if they don't understand it, they have to be able to understand. You have to be able to communicate, and I think that's what you're saying, right? Like you're really technical. You're in the thick of it, but you have to be able to take that back out and say, how can you go ahead and explain it to somebody who has no understanding? I think that's what you're saying, right?
Exactly, Joe. That's exactly what I'm saying. Is that is an extremely important aspect for an entrepreneur who's coming out of university as a grad student, and all his life he's been in the lab. So I think that's an extremely important aspect.
Yeah, well, great. Well, I appreciate this conversation. I'm going to go ahead and ask Johnny if you have any closing remarks, Deepak, and then Eli will close it out with you if that's okay. Johnny, any closing remarks here?
Yeah, just one thing, I guess. If you're an entrepreneur, you're looking at raising money, 50K to 5 million, please, consider doing that from your customers and community. There's many platforms out there. I work for WeFunder, so check out WeFunder, but it's a relatively new law. And especially if you have an audience of customers that really love you and your product, then it can be a great option, both for raising the capital and building even more loyalty and love among your customers and fans.
Yeah, turning customers into investors and keeping them around. Listen, the best way to go ahead, and the cheapest customer is one that comes back again and again, and probably even cheaper is one that's gone ahead and made a financial investment in it, right? So being able to have that level of support. Deepak, any last closing words that you want to share with us?
Yeah, to all the lab rats out there, as I call them, if you have a great idea and you think, you know what it is and it can make a big difference, don't shy away from trying to start a business. Take that next step, because most people in my space I know are kind of introverts. Take that next step and go out and speak to people and try to explain. And as you said, if a 10-year-old and an 80-year-old can understand it, and I think you're doing a good job. But until then, keep grinding away, and don't shy away from taking a risk and starting a business, compared to, say, going to work for big tech, because trust me, the long term, it really pays, and there's a lot of growth, not just financially, but also personally for you.
Yeah, it's very rewarding. The money's one thing, right? That certainly helps, but certainly the personal fulfillment that you get from this. Eli, started Investors of Color and the board of the Angel Capital Association. Bring us home here. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, a couple of things, Joe. So for the entrepreneurs out there, think when you're about to raise capital, you're thinking of raising capital, think of it this way. You're going to create a startup within your startup. And that startup is focused on raising capital. So that means you have to put all the planning documents together. You have to decide who the best team member is to go do that. And you have to build your customer base, right, which are your investors. Then you have to achieve those financial goals, which is your fundraise, which is equivalent to like your revenue. So think of like the way you're thinking about starting your business, you have to think about it in the same way when you're going out to raise capital. It's going to require time, effort, and strategy, and you have to be very ready. Two, the thing that I share with a lot of entrepreneurs is investors are not holier than thou, mightier than thou. If you come across investors that are arrogant, they are not going to be good for your team. Okay, kick them out. You want investors who work with you, ask you good questions, really want to integrate with your business and understand how they can be helpful. So do not go in there with a shifted power dynamics or power imbalance. you are on equal footing. You are making an ask. They're making a strategic decision. There's risk on both sides of the table. And so you both have to understand where each play. And so the entrepreneur is not lesser than the investor. And please remember that. Anybody who treats you otherwise is not a good investor. And for the investors and for the folks out there that are thinking about getting into investing and you've been talking about it, you don't really know what it's like or what it's all about, do the research, right? There's multiple channels and we're out there trying to plow the field to make more channels happen. There's folks like Johnny Price and his organization. There's the angel groups. There's other areas where you can start to get involved. There's the Angel Capital Association, right? So we need more investors and we need more people that haven't traditionally thought themselves as investors to start getting into investing and go out into the community and say, I am an investor, right? And then write the check. So if you call yourself an investor, make sure you have written the check, because until you do that, it's all smokescreen. So for all those investors that put that on LinkedIn, make sure that you've actually written the check, because when these founders come knocking on your door, they're going to be expecting you to hold up to what you say you are. So I hope, that we cross paths again. My hope is that for the entrepreneurs out there, they make it wildly successful, so successful that they become accredited investors and they themselves are also investing in other companies. And I look forward to, coming across all these folks in the future.
Well, great. This has been a fantastic panel, and I appreciate the wisdom of each of you, and Max and Jessica as well. It's a unique opportunity for us to be able to share this message of how you go down this path and demystify it. I'd like to go ahead and just invite you back at some point in the not too distant future for us to continue these conversations, because it's just absolutely important. But thank you, each of you, Deepak and Eli and Johnny and Max and Jessica, for joining us. National Entrepreneurship Week was restarted specifically to focus on all communities and to really open up opportunities to start businesses and network. And I am super grateful to Amber, who has just joined us and has been operating behind the scenes and in front of the scenes all week. Just a fantastic conversation. Before we jump off, I want to see if, Amber, you have anything you'd like to add before we go ahead and say goodbye.
No, I just want to say thank you. What a powerful conversation to wrap up the week. And thank you to everyone that's watching this live or in the recordings. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. And I just want to also give a quick shout out once again to all of the members of the team who helped us relaunch National Entrepreneurship Week. And throughout the course of the week, all of the speakers, the fantastic speakers from educators, from ecosystem builders, all of the folks from the federal government agencies that came to the table to share their wisdom and information. Yesterday, a whole host of entrepreneurs, really, really fantastic entrepreneurs. One of the things about this conversation is we're talking about businesses that really need a lot of capital, but it's okay if you want to go ahead and start a small business and that's where you're at. Whether you want to become a plumber or HVAC person, the goal for National Entrepreneurship Week is to help people figure out the tools and the opportunities to go ahead and change their own particular situation. And it doesn't always look like the Steve Jobs and the Bezos of the world. There's opportunities all of the time. And so I also want to finalize and thank you and all of the panelists today that have shared with us. And finally, just a thank you to all the entrepreneurs out there, day in and day out, going out there, waging tilting at windmills with trying to go ahead and build new businesses and opportunities to help the human condition. So with that, this is Joe Cap from National Entrepreneurship Week, and I am out of here. Thank you guys. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Thank you.